Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I was driving my delivery route over Sherman Pass on Highway 20 in Washington. It was early spring, maybe late March, and the morning was that kind of cold that gets right into your bones, the kind that the truck's heater never quite seems to beat. The sky was just starting to lighten from black to a deep bruised grey, so it must have been around 5 in the morning. I know my route. I've driven it for 12 years. I know every curve, every pothole, every single damn tree that looks like a twisted old man on the stretch just after the summit. My rig is an old Peterbilt 379, a real workhorse, but she groans on these inclines. The cab smells like stale coffee and the pine tree air freshener my wife stuck on the vent 2 months ago. That morning the radio was just static and faint, broken pieces of a country song from a station I couldn't quite lock onto. So it was just me, the hum of the engine and the sound of the wind whipping past. I was coming down the eastern side of the pass. The snow was mostly gone from the road itself, but the banks on either side were still piled high, dirty and crusted, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall in places. The forest was thick, a solid wall of dark green pine and bare, skeletal, deciduous trees. It's lonely up there. You can drive for 20-30 minutes and not see another soul, especially that early. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, a big one standing on its hind legs, maybe caught in my headlights. But my high beams were on, cutting a clean white path through the dark, and the shape was just off to the side, maybe 50 yards ahead, standing right at the tree line where the snowbank dropped off. I eased my foot off the accelerator. Not a brake slam, just a natural slowing down because something didn't look right. My brain was trying to file it under bear and move on, but it wasn't working. The proportions were all wrong. It was too tall, too lanky. A bear standing up is kind of rounded, top-heavy. This thing was wiry, powerful, but in a lean way. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and it was just standing there perfectly still, facing the road. As I got closer, the details started to punch through the early morning gloom. The head was conical, sort of peaked, not round like a bear's. There were no ears that I could see, or if there were, they lay flat against the skull. The whole body was covered in what looked like hair, but it wasn't fur. It was longer, shaggier, a color somewhere between dark brown and wet charcoal, matted and filthy. It was so still, it was unnatural. Nothing in the woods stands that still. A deer will flick its ear, a bear will shift its weight. This was a statue. My heart was starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. I could feel my palms getting slick on the steering wheel, the worn leather suddenly feeling foreign. I was maybe 100 feet away now, and I was staring. I couldn't help it. I was trying to make my eyes make sense of it. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a quick animal movement. It was slow, deliberate. The whole head rotated on its shoulders, and it looked right at me, right into the cab. The eyes, I'll never forget the eyes. They weren't reflective like a deer's or a dog's. They were just dark, deep-set and utterly black, like 2 holes punched right through the world. There was no curiosity in that look, no fear. It was just an assessment, a cold, flat observation. A jolt of pure, undiluted fear went through me. It was like a shot of electricity straight to my spine. My foot, almost of its own accord, stomped down on the accelerator. The old Pete's engine roared, and the truck lurched forward. I didn't want to be near it. I didn't want it looking at me for 1 more second. As I shot past, my head swiveled, my eyes glued to the side mirror. The thing was still standing there, but now it had taken a step, one long, fluid step out of the trees and onto the shoulder of the road. It was even bigger than I thought. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It just stood on the asphalt, watching my taillights disappear. For the next mile, I was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. My knuckles were white on the wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see it loping after me, but there was nothing, just the empty, winding road behind me, swallowed by the dark. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, a weird tree, a trick of the light, but I knew it was none of those things. The feeling in my gut was a solid, cold weight. That was no animal I'd ever seen or heard of. The road curved sharply to the left, following the contour of the mountain. I took the turn too fast, the trailer groaning in protest. As I came out of the bend, my high beams swept across the forest ahead, and my blood went cold. It was there. Impossible, but it was there. Standing in the middle of the road, a good quarter-mile ahead of where it had just been. There was no way it could have gotten there. No animal on earth is that fast. The road was the only path, and it was a long, winding one. To get ahead of me, it would have had to go straight through the dense, snow-choked forest, uphill, in the dark. It was impossible, yet there it stood. Same posture, same unnerving stillness. It was facing me this time, a massive dark silhouette blocking my lane. I slammed on the brakes, the air brakes hissed and screamed, and the whole rig shuddered, the trailer wanting to swing out. I came to a stop about 200 yards from it. The engine idled rough. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I was just staring, frozen. What the hell was I supposed to do? Honk? Reverse? I was in a semi-truck on a narrow mountain pass. My options were zero. We just stayed like that for what felt like an hour. Me, trapped in my metal box, and it, standing in the road like it owned the damn place. The fear had crystallized into something else, a kind of numb, horrified awe. The sheer size of it was staggering. It made the tall pines on either side look less imposing. Then it moved. It didn't run. It took a step to its left, off the road and into the deep snow of the bank. It moved with an impossible grace for something so huge. It didn't struggle or post-hole in the snow. It just glided. It walked along the top of the snowbank, parallel to the road, keeping pace with me even though I was stopped. Its head was turned, and those black eyes were locked on me the whole time. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I just watched it walk. Its arms swung slightly, those long, heavy-looking arms. The gait was smooth, powerful. It was showing me. It was showing me that it wasn't stuck on the road. It was choosing to be there. It was herding me. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped walking. It was now almost directly opposite my driver's side window, maybe 40 feet away, separated by a ditch and the snowbank. It was closer than it had ever been. The details were horrifyingly clear in my high beams. The matted hair was clumped with mud and bits of twig. I could see the powerful musculature in its shoulders and chest. I could see its face. It didn't have a snout. The face was flatter, more like a man's, but covered in that same dark hair, shorter around the mouth and eyes. The mouth was a grim, straight line. And the smell, oh God. The smell. I had my windows up, but it seeped in through the vents. It was a thick, heavy stench, like a combination of a rotting carcass, wet dog, and something else, something foul and musky I can't even describe. It was the smell of something old, something that didn't belong here. It raised one of its long arms. The hand was huge, with thick, powerful fingers. It didn't have claws like a bear. They were more like thick, dark nails. It pointed, not at me, past me, down the road. A single deliberate gesture. The message was unmistakable. Go. My body unfroze. I fumbled with the gear shift, my hands trembling so badly I could barely find the right slot. I got it into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The truck lunged forward. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't look to the side. I just stared straight ahead at the yellow lines. My entire world narrowed to this strip of asphalt. I drove like that for 10 minutes, my speed creeping up way past what was safe for that road. I was shaking all over, a full body tremble that felt like I was coming apart. My teeth were chattering. Finally, I saw a pullout, a wide gravel area for truckers to check their brakes. I swerved into it, the tires crunching on the gravel, and slammed to a stop. I threw the door open and stumbled out, falling to my knees on the cold, wet ground. I vomited, heaving up the coffee and the fear until there was nothing left but dry, painful spasms. I stayed there for a long time, on my hands and knees, gasping, the cold seeping through my jeans. When I could finally stand, I looked back up the road, the way I'd come. It was empty, silent. The sun was starting to properly rise now, casting a weak grey light over the mountains. The world looked normal again, but it wasn't. It would never be normal again. I got back in the truck. I didn't even brush the gravel off my knees. I just drove. I drove all the way to my first delivery stop in Kettle Falls, and I didn't stop shaking until I was parked in their lot, surrounded by other trucks and the sounds of a waking town. I never told my dispatcher. What would I say? I never told my wife, not the whole story. She wouldn't have slept for a week. I just said, I saw a weird animal and it spooked me. But I know what I saw. I know how still it stood. I know how its head turned. I know the impossible way it got ahead of me. I know the intelligence in those black eyes. I know the meaning of that pointed finger. And I know that smell. I still smell it sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, and I'll jolt awake, my heart hammering, back on that cold, dark mountain pass, completely and utterly powerless. I haven't driven that route since. I took a pay cut to drive in the valley. People ask me why, and I just say I got tired of the mountain. But the truth is, the mountain isn't empty, and something on it told me to leave. Story 2. Okay, so this happened back in the summer of 2010. I was in my early 30s then, and life was pretty normal. I had a decent job, was single again after a recent breakup, and just trying to enjoy the simple things. My friend from UCLA, we'd been close since college, invited me and my ex-girlfriend to join him and his wife for a weekend at a cabin in Crestline, California, near Lake Arrowhead. Yeah, I know, bringing an ex might sound weird, but we'd stayed friends, and it felt like a chance to unwind without any drama. We all got along, and honestly, I was just looking forward to getting out of the city for a bit. We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock. I remember the drive up being steep and winding, with trees so thick you could barely see the sky. When we pulled into the driveway, the place was way more extravagant than I'd expected. This huge, rustic-looking cabin with a big deck and windows everywhere. But what struck me was how isolated it felt, like there were no other houses in sight. Just dense forest all around, and the air had that crisp, piney smell that makes you feel like you're really in the middle of nowhere. We unloaded the car, joking around and feeling that buzz of excitement you get when you're about to start a vacation. My friend's wife was already planning out meals, and my ex was laughing about some old memory, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like the woods were watching us. Not in a creepy way at first, just intense, you know? Like the silence was too heavy. After we settled in, we decided to go for a hike before it got dark. There was a trail nearby that led toward Lake Gregory, and someone had mentioned it was an easy walk with great views. We grabbed some water bottles and headed out, the sun still casting long shadows through the trees. The trail was narrow and packed with pine needles, so our footsteps were almost silent except for the occasional crunch of a twig. I remember the light filtering through the branches in these golden streaks, and the air was cool but not cold, with that damp earth smell that reminds you of rain, even when it hasn't rained in days. We were talking and laughing, but as we got deeper in, the conversation died down. It's like the forest just swallows sound, and you start to notice every little noise. A bird chirping somewhere, the rustle of leaves, your own breathing. Then, out of nowhere, this deer came bolting toward us. It wasn't just running, it was frantic, like it was being chased. Its eyes were wide, and it was moving so fast I barely had time to react. My friend, who was a few steps ahead, dove into the brush to avoid it, and I rushed over to help him up. He'd scraped his arm on some branches, and as I was pulling him to his feet, I caught something in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe another animal, but then I turned my head slightly and I saw it. It was about 50 feet away, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees, dark and muscular, low to the ground, and at first glance I thought it was a big cat, like a mountain lion, but something was off. It didn't have ears, or at least I couldn't see any, and its fur was this matted, almost black color that blended into the shadows. It was on all fours, and its body was tense, like it was coiled and ready to spring. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I froze, my hand still on my friend's arm. He must have seen it too, because he went completely still, and I heard his breath hitch. For a second, everything just stopped. The forest went quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. Then the creature moved. It didn't slink or crawl, it rose. In what felt like a single fluid motion, it pushed itself up onto 2 feet. And I swear to God, it was taller than any man I've ever seen. Must have been 7, 8 feet tall, and its arms were long and thick with muscle. But the worst part was its face. It didn't look like an animal's face, more like something between a human and a beast, with dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to lock onto us, and its mouth. It kept licking the corners of its lips, over and over, in this slow, deliberate way that made my skin crawl. It was too human-like, like it was savoring something, and the hair on its body stood up in patches, bristling like it was charged with electricity. I couldn't move. I felt this cold sweat break out all over me, and my legs turned to jelly. My friend was muttering something under his breath, like, "What the hell is that?" But it came out as a whisper. We were all staring, trying to make sense of it, but our brains just wouldn't compute. It was like seeing a car crash in slow motion. You know it's real, but it doesn't feel possible. The creature just stood there, staring back at us, and I could see its chest moving as it breathed. Its tongue darted out again, wetting its lips, and I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that makes you want to curl up and hide. Then my friend snapped. He yelled, "Run!" and bolted back down the trail. That broke the spell, and we all took off, scrambling through the undergrowth. I didn't look back at first. I was too focused on not tripping, but after a few seconds, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature was still there, watching us, and for a horrifying moment, I thought it took a step forward. I don't know if it was chasing us or not, but the fear was enough to make me run faster than I ever have in my life. My lungs burned, and branches whipped at my face and arms, leaving little cuts that stung like hell. I could hear the others panting and crashing through the brush beside me, and every sound made me think it was right behind us. The run back to the cabin felt like it took forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest, and I kept imagining those eyes on me, that tongue moving. When we finally burst out of the trees and onto the driveway, we didn't stop until we were inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. We all collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, and for a long time no one said anything. We just sat there, listening to each other breathe, waiting to see if something would follow us. When we finally started talking, it was a mess. My friend was insisting it was a gorilla. He said it had that kind of build, broad shoulders and powerful legs. His wife thought it was a hairy man, like some kind of hermit living in the woods. But I couldn't shake the image of it on all fours, how cat-like it had seemed at first. We argued back and forth, our voices shaky, and I remember feeling this frustration because none of us could agree. It was like our minds had grabbed onto the closest thing we could understand, but deep down, we all knew it wasn't any of those things. My ex was crying softly, and I put an arm around her, but my hands were trembling so bad I could barely steady them. We spent the rest of the evening huddled in the living room, too scared to even look out the windows. Every creak of the cabin made us jump, and we kept the lights on, as if that would keep whatever it was away. I kept replaying the moment it rose up in my head, over and over, and each time the fear felt fresh. That tongue, those lips. It was so deliberate, so unnerving. I've never felt so small and vulnerable, like we'd stumbled into a place where we didn't belong. We left the next morning, cutting the trip short. None of us wanted to stay another night. Driving away, I kept looking back at the forest, half expecting to see it standing at the edge, watching us go. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. To this day, I don't know what we saw. Was it some kind of animal, a person, something else? I've read stories online about similar things, people talking about Bigfoot or other creatures. And part of me wants to believe it was just a bear or a trick of the light. But I can't forget the way it looked at us, or how it moved. It's left me with this deep-seated fear of the woods and a curiosity that gnaws at me sometimes. What else is out there, hiding in places we think we know? I'll probably never have an answer, and that's almost as scary as the encounter itself. Story 3. It was one of those perfect fall mornings that make you forget about everything else for a while. The air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that nips at your nose but feels good in your lungs, and the leaves were just starting to turn, painting the hills in shades of orange and red. My spouse and I had been talking about getting out of the house with the kids for weeks. Life had been busy with work and school, and we needed a break. So we packed up the car early, around 8 in the morning, with a cooler of snacks and drinks, and headed out to Red River Gorge. The kids, both under 5 years old, were buzzing with excitement in the back seat, pointing at every squirrel and bird they saw along the way. We've been to the gorge a handful of times before. It's not too far from where we live, and it's always felt like a safe, familiar place to unwind. The trails are well marked, and even though it can get crowded on weekends, there's still pockets of quiet if you know where to look. That day, we picked a moderate trail, one we'd done before, that winds through the woods and follows the river for a bit. The plan was to hike for a couple of hours, let the kids burn off some energy, and then maybe find a spot to have a picnic. The sun was out, but not too strong, and the sky was this clear, pale blue that made everything feel peaceful. The hike itself was uneventful in a good way. The kids chatted away, picking up leaves and sticks, and my spouse and I held hands, just enjoying the quiet moments between their little bursts of energy. We saw a few other families on the trail, exchanged nods and smiles, but mostly we had the path to ourselves. After about an hour and a half, the kids started to slow down, their little legs getting tired, so we turned back toward the car. By the time we got there, they were both zonked out in their car seats, breathing deeply, all tuckered out from the fresh air and exercise. We decided to take the scenic route back home, driving along Route 715. It's a winding road that follows the Red River, with these gorgeous overlooks and pull-offs where you can stop and take in the view. The river was running pretty high from recent rains, but it looked inviting, all clear and sparkling in the sunlight. We'd heard about this one spot where there's a big rock you can climb up and jump into the river from. It's kind of a local thing, not too dangerous if you're careful, and I'd been wanting to try it for a while. My spouse isn't much of a swimmer, so they usually stay on the bank, but I've always loved the thrill of jumping into cold water. We found the pull-off easily enough. It's just a small gravel area off the side of the road, big enough for a few cars. There was no one else around, which was nice. It felt like we had the whole place to ourselves. The rock is this massive flat-top boulder that juts out over the river, maybe 15 or 20 feet high. It's not a sheer cliff or anything, more like a steep slope you can scramble up if you're careful. The river below was deep enough for jumping, with a calm pool at the base. My spouse stayed in the car with the kids, who were still fast asleep, and I got out, stretching my legs after the drive. I remember feeling a little giddy, like a kid again, as I walked over to the rock. The ground was soft under my shoes, a mix of dirt and fallen leaves, and I could hear the river gurgling nearby. It was so quiet otherwise, just the sound of the water and the occasional bird chirping. I started climbing up the rock, using my hands to steady myself. The surface was rough and gritty, with patches of moss that made it a bit slippery in places. I took my time, not wanting to rush and risk falling. When I reached the top, I stood there for a moment, catching my breath and taking in the view. The river stretched out below me, wide and dark in the shadows, and the trees on the opposite bank were thick and dense, almost like a wall of green. I was standing there, psyching myself up for the jump, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was some kind of animal noise, maybe a dog or something, but it was deeper, way deeper than any dog I'd ever heard. It sounded like a gorilla's charge warning. I've seen videos of gorillas at the zoo, and this was similar, but louder and more raw, like it was coming from something much bigger. It wasn't a growl or a roar, more like a harsh, guttural bark that echoed across the river. The sound hit me like a physical blow, and I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I couldn't see where it came from at first, but it was definitely from the other side of the river, somewhere in those thick woods. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bear, but I've heard bears before, and this didn't sound like any bear I knew. It was too deep, too aggressive. Then, before I could even process it, there was this loud cracking sound, like a tree being hit with incredible force. I looked over and I saw a tree on the opposite bank shake violently, its branches whipping back and forth. It wasn't just a small tremor. The whole tree shuddered, and I could see leaves and bits of bark flying off. Whatever had made that sound had just slammed into that tree, hard. The impact was so powerful that I felt a chill run down my spine, and my stomach tightened into a knot. I didn't wait to see more. Instinct took over, and I started backing down the rock slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the opposite bank. My hands were trembling, and I had to focus on each movement, making sure I didn't slip. Every second felt like an eternity. I was terrified that whatever it was could cross the river faster than I could get down. The river isn't that wide here, maybe 50 feet across, and if it was big enough to shake a tree like that, it could probably swim or wade through in no time. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and my heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As I was halfway down, I heard it again. This time, it was moving. There was a crashing sound through the underbrush on the other side, like something huge was barreling through the trees. It wasn't running away. It was coming closer, toward the river. I didn't see it, but I could hear the branches snapping and the leaves rustling, and it was getting louder, faster. That's when panic fully set in. I stopped trying to back down carefully and just slid the rest of the way, scraping my hands and knees on the rough rock. I didn't care about the pain. All I could think about was getting to the car. I hit the ground hard, stumbling to my feet, and I ran. I've never run that fast in my life. My legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I could still hear the crashing behind me, and I didn't look back. I just focused on the car, which seemed so far away even though it was only a few dozen yards. My spouse must have seen me, because as I got closer, the car door swung open, and I practically dove inside, slamming it shut behind me. "Go, go, go!" I shouted, my voice shaking. My spouse was staring at me, eyes wide with confusion and fear. They hadn't heard the sounds from inside the car, with the windows up, but they saw the terror on my face. Without asking questions, they hit the gas, and we peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind us. I was breathing so hard I could barely speak, and I kept glancing back out the rear window, expecting to see something chasing us. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the trees fading into the distance. The kids woke up from the sudden movement, crying a little, but we calmed them down quickly. For a few minutes, no one said anything. We just drove, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken fear. Finally, my spouse asked, "What happened? You looked like you saw a ghost." I tried to explain, but my words came out in a jumble. The sound, the tree shaking, the crashing in the woods. I described it as best I could, and when I mentioned the gorilla-like bark, my spouse's face went pale. They'd heard stories about Bigfoot in the area, but we'd always dismissed them as folklore. something for tourists. Now, it didn't seem so far-fetched. We drove for about 20 minutes before we felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station. I got out and checked myself. My hands were scraped and bleeding a little from the slide down the rock, and my clothes were dirty. But more than that, I felt shaken to my core. We sat in the car for a while, talking in hushed tones, trying to make sense of it. My spouse said they'd felt a weird vibe the whole time we were stopped, like we were being watched. But they hadn't said anything because they didn't want to spook me. We both agreed that whatever it wasn't a bear or any animal we knew. The sound, the force, it had to be something else. To this day, we still talk about it, especially when we're out in nature or hear a strange noise at night. We've never gone back to that spot, and I doubt we ever will. Sometimes I'll wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that deep bark and the way the tree shook. I've tried to research it online, read accounts from other people who've had similar experiences in Red River Gorge, and a lot of them describe the same thing. A loud, aggressive sound, trees being hit, and this overwhelming sense of dread. Most of them call it Bigfoot, and I can't think of a better explanation. It's not something I can prove, and I don't want to sound crazy, but I know what I heard and felt that day. It was real, and it's left a mark on me that I don't think will ever fade. Story 4. It was September of 1986, and I was 13 years old. That age where you're not a little kid anymore, but you're sure not an adult. And the world is this weird mix of boring and terrifying. We lived on a walnut farm in York County, South Carolina. Not a huge commercial operation, just a few acres my dad managed, enough to keep us busy and give us a little extra. The house was old, white paint peeling in the humidity, set back from a dirt road that turned to red mud when it rained. That particular morning was a Saturday. I remember because there was no school. The air was already thick and warm, the kind of late summer heat that promises a scorching afternoon. My chore was to walk down our long driveway to the mailbox at the main road to fetch the newspaper. It was a chore I usually didn't mind. It got me out of the house, gave me a few minutes to myself. I had our dog, Sam, with me. He was a mutt, mostly Labrador, black as midnight and with a goofy, slobbering affection that I loved. He trotted ahead of me, his tail wagging, sniffing at every clump of grass and fire ant mound. The driveway was probably a quarter-mile long, gravel crunching under my sneakers. On either side were our walnut trees, their leaves still full and green. Beyond them, the land dipped down into a hollow, a low wooded area that was always damp and shadowy, even at midday. We didn't go down there much. It was thick with underbrush and mosquitoes. I was about halfway to the road when Sam stopped dead in his tracks. His head went up, his ears pricked forward, and his whole body went rigid. His tail, which had been a happy metronome, dropped and went still. A low growl started deep in his chest, a sound I'd only ever heard him make once before, when a strange dog had wandered onto our property. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, my own heart giving a little thump. He didn't look at me. His nose was twitching, sniffing the air frantically. Then I smelled it too. It hit me all at once, a smell so strong and out of place it made my nose wrinkle. It was like wild onions, but not the pleasant kind you sometimes find in the woods. This was sharper, more pungent, mixed with something else, something musky and wet, like a dog that had been rolling in something dead and then got caught in the rain. It was a heavy smell, a physical presence in the air that made the back of my throat feel coated. Sam's growl intensified into a snarl, his lips pulling back from his teeth. He took a step backward, bumping into my legs. I remember feeling a prickle of fear, not from anything I'd seen, but from Sam's reaction and that smell. It was wrong. It didn't belong there. I followed his line of sight, looking down into the hollow. The trees were thinner at the edge of our property, letting in shafts of the morning sun. At first I didn't see anything, just shadows and leaves. Then my brain caught up with my eyes, piecing together the shape that didn't fit. There was something standing in the hollow. It was massive, The only way I can describe its height is to say it was as tall as our small tool shed, the one my dad kept the lawnmower in. That shed was maybe 8 feet tall. This thing was that big. It was just standing there perfectly still, partly obscured by a tangle of blackberry bushes. It was covered in hair, not fur like a bear, but long, shaggy hair, the color of dry grass or light brown dirt. And the sun, hitting it from behind, did something strange. It looked like the air around it was shimmering, like heat haze off asphalt in July. But this was a golden amber color. It wasn't glowing, not exactly, but it had this aura, this halo of light that made the hairs on its back look like they were tipped in gold. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, one hand on Sam's back, feeling the tremors running through him. My mind was racing, trying to slot this thing into a category I understood. A bear? No, it was too tall, too upright. A person in a costume? That was stupid. Who would be out here in the woods in a giant, hairy costume? The creature moved. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was slow, deliberate. It turned its upper body slightly, and I saw its arm reach out. Its arm was incredibly long, just hanging down, and the hand... I saw the hand brush against a wild grapevine that grew along an old fence post down there. The vine was heavy with dark purple grapes. It plucked a bunch of grapes with these long, thick fingers and brought them up to its face. That's when I got a clearer look at its head. It wasn't ape-like. It wasn't bear-like. The best I can describe it, and I know this sounds awful, but it looked mongoloid. That was the word that popped into my terrified 13-year-old brain. The face was flat, with a heavy, prominent brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. The head was conical, sort of pointed at the top. It put the grapes in its mouth, and I saw its lips pull back. Its teeth were there, big and square and a yellowish color, like old piano keys. It chewed, and I could hear a soft, wet crushing sound from where I stood, a sound that carried unnervingly well in the quiet morning air. It wasn't acting aggressive. It was just eating. It seemed curious about the grapes, turning the bunch over in its hand before plucking another one. It was this mundane action, this everyday thing, that made the whole situation 1,000 times more terrifying. This wasn't a monster from a movie roaring and charging. This was a living thing, going about its business, and I was a hidden spectator to something I was never, ever supposed to see. Sam had gone silent beside me, but he was trembling violently, a low whine escaping his throat now and then. I think my own fear had bled into him, or maybe he just understood the sheer scale of the thing down there. It was the size of a small shed. I kept coming back to that. The sheer bulk of it was staggering. Then it did something that sent a jolt of pure ice water through my veins. It stopped chewing. It tilted its head, just a little, in my direction. It wasn't a full-on look, more like a curious notion, like it had heard something or sensed something. Its eyes, I saw its eyes. They were a deep, dark brown, like the rich soil in our garden. They didn't look angry or evil. They just looked aware. In that split second, a bizarre thought flashed through my head. It knows I'm here. That thought broke the spell of my paralysis. A cold sweat instantly broke out all over my body, under my arms, down my back. My heart wasn't just thumping now. It was hammering against my ribs like it wanted to get out. Every instinct I had, every primal piece of code in my brain, was screaming one word: run. I must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, or maybe Sam finally lost his nerve. He let out a single sharp bark, not a threatening one, but a high-pitched, panicked yelp, and then he spun around and bolted. He didn't look back. He just ran for home as fast as his legs could carry him, a black streak disappearing up the gravel drive. The creature's head swung around. Now it was looking right at me, full on, those dark brown eyes locked onto mine from across the hollow. The curious notion was gone. Its face was completely still, expressionless, but the sheer size of it, the strangeness of its appearance, the power I could feel radiating from it even at this distance was the most frightening thing I have ever experienced in my life. It wasn't what it did. It was what it was. It was impossible. It wasn't supposed to exist, and it was looking at me. I didn't think, I didn't decide to run. My body just did it. I spun around so fast I almost fell, my sneakers skidding on the loose gravel. And then I ran. I ran like I was on fire. I ran like the devil himself was on my heels. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was closed tight with a fear so absolute it was suffocating. All my breath was needed for running. I pumped my arms and legs, my lungs burning almost immediately. The gravel crunched and shifted under my feet, threatening to turn my ankles. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a deafening waterfall sound that drowned out everything else, but not everything. Behind me, from the hollow, there was a sound. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream, it was a deep, guttural whoop. A short, powerful exhalation that was almost like a question. It was a sound I'd never heard before, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was low, but it carried, vibrating in the air and in my bones. It was a sound of pure, raw power. That sound gave me a burst of speed I didn't know I had. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back and saw it coming after me, I knew I would just collapse. I would die right there on the driveway. So I kept my eyes glued on the house, which seemed a million miles away. The white siding, the green roof, the screen door. It was a lighthouse, the only safe place in the entire world. I could smell that wild onion and wet musk smell. Even as I ran, it was stuck in my nose, in my mouth. I could taste it. I felt like I was coated in it. My legs were jelly. My side had a stitch like a knife was stuck in it. But I didn't slow down. I hit the porch steps in 2 leaps, yanked the screen door open so hard I thought the spring would snap, and fell into the kitchen, slamming the wooden door shut behind me and twisting the deadbolt. I stood there, my back against the door, my chest heaving, unable to get enough air. I was dripping with sweat, trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. My mom was at the stove. She turned around, a spatula in her hand. "For heaven's sake, what's gotten into you? You're tracking gravel all over my clean floor." I just stared at her, my eyes wide, still panting. I tried to speak, but only a wheezing gasp came out. Sam was there too, hiding under the kitchen table, whining softly. "Did you see a snake or something?" she asked, her tone shifting from annoyed to slightly concerned. I shook my head, still unable to form words. The smell was still in my nose. I could still see those dark brown eyes looking at me. I could still feel the sheer, overwhelming size of it. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and I started to cry. Not loud sobs, just silent, shaking tears of pure, undiluted terror. I never did tell them what I saw. Not my mom, not my dad. What would I have said? I saw a monster as tall as the tool shed eating grapes. They would have thought I had a sunstroke or was reading too many scary books, so I kept it to myself. I never went down that driveway alone again. For weeks I had nightmares. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, that wet, musky smell filling my dream nose, sure that I could hear that deep whoop from outside my window. The memory of that day in September of 1986 is burned into me. It's as clear and sharp as if it happened yesterday. The feel of the gravel, the weight of the morning air, the way Sam's fur felt under my hand when he went rigid, the exact color of the light on that thing's back, the crushing sound of the grapes, the texture of its yellowish teeth, the paralyzing moment our eyes met. I can close my eyes and be right back there, 13 years old, and forever understanding that the woods and the world held things I could never explain. I never saw it again, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, on a quiet, humid morning, if the wind is just right, I think I can still smell the wild onions. Story 5. It was late October 2004. I remember that specifically because it was the week before Halloween, and I'd been thinking about taking my nephew out, trick-or-treating. The air had that bite to it, the kind that tells you winter isn't far off, but it wasn't cold enough for a jacket, just a flannel shirt over a t-shirt. The sky was the color of wet cement, a solid, flat gray from one horizon to the other. No sun, no shadows, just this even, dull light that made everything feel quieter. I was out near Storm Ranch, a place I'd been going to for years. It's not far from the New River, a mix of old pine flats and patches of hardwood trees that turn crazy colors in the fall. I'm a forager. I hunt for mushrooms. Morel season was long gone, but this time of year is good for hen of the woods and a few other varieties if you know where to look. It's my quiet time. My wife knows if I'm gone for a few hours on a weekend, I'm probably out in the woods with my basket, just walking and looking at the ground. That day, I'd parked my truck off the main road on a little pull-out gravel spot that the loggers use. I'd been in the woods for a couple of hours already. My basket had a few decent finds, nothing spectacular, but enough to make the trip feel worthwhile. The forest was still. That's the only word for it. Normally, you hear things. Squirrels chattering, birds, the rustle of leaves as a deer moves through. But that afternoon, it was like someone had thrown a blanket over everything. The only sound was the soft crunch of my own boots on the damp leaf litter. And the cattle. Storm Ranch lets their cattle free range in those woods. I'm used to seeing them. Usually they just look at you with those dumb, placid faces and then go back to chewing grass. But that day, they were different. There was a small group of them, maybe 6 or 7, and they were restless. I first noticed it when I was circling a big oak, looking for mushrooms at its base. I saw a cow, a big black Angus, and it was watching me. Not just a glance, but a solid, fixed stare. I moved on, and a minute later, I saw the same cow, or one just like it off to my left, then another one ahead. It felt like they were tracking me. Not in a menacing way, not like they were going to charge, but in a tight, nervous circle. They'd low softly, a deep, worried sound, and their heads were up, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. They were on edge. I'd never seen cattle act like that. It put me on edge too. It's a weird feeling, being the center of attention for a bunch of anxious cows. It makes you feel like you're the problem, or like you're not the only thing in the woods. That feeling of unease started to grow. It went from a little background noise in my head to a steady hum. My neck felt tight. I found myself stopping more often, not to look for mushrooms, but just to listen, to scan the trees. Everything looked normal, just trees and ferns and grey sky, but it didn't feel normal. The air itself felt thick, heavy. It was hard to take a full breath. I decided to call it a day. The light was starting to go anyway. That late October dusk comes on fast, turning the world blue and then grey before the blackness sets in. I turned and started heading back the way I came, or at least the way I thought I'd come. My sense of direction is usually pretty good in those woods, but the sameness of the grey light was messing with me. I just kept walking, aiming for what I hoped was the road. The cattle were still with me. I could hear them moving through the brush, keeping their distance but definitely following. Their lowing was more frequent now, a little louder. It was a stressed sound. I picked up my pace. My heart was starting to thump a little harder in my chest, not from exertion, but from that low-grade building fear, the kind you try to talk yourself out of. It's just cows. You're spooking yourself. It's getting dark, that's all. Finally, I saw the break in the trees up ahead, the road. Relief washed over me, a physical sensation that made my knees feel a little weak. I was almost out. I pushed through a final thicket of young pines, my flannel shirt snagging on a branch, and I stumbled out onto the shoulder of the 2-lane blacktop. I stood there for a second, catching my breath, the solidity of the pavement under my boots feeling strangely foreign. The road was empty in both directions. It was that quiet time of evening, not quite night, where most people are already home. I looked back into the woods. The cattle had stopped at the tree line. They weren't following me out. They were just clustered there, a dark, shifting mass in the gloom, all facing my direction, and they were completely silent now. That was worse than the noise. Then I heard it. It wasn't from the cattle, it came from the other side of the road, a loud, heavy thud. It was a solid sound, like someone had dropped a big sack of wet sand onto the ground, a deep, impactful noise that seemed to vibrate through the pavement up into the soles of my feet. My head snapped toward the sound, my brain trying to catch up, threw out stupid explanations. A falling branch, a deer? But it was too heavy for a deer, way too heavy. I didn't even have time to finish the thought. Something came up the embankment on the other side of the road. It didn't walk up. It charged. It exploded up the slope. It was a blur of motion, so fast and so powerful, it was like the ground itself had erupted. It was coming straight for me. My body froze completely. It wasn't a choice. It was like every circuit in my nervous system just blew at once. My brain was screaming, but my legs were blocks of wood, my arms locked at my sides. I just stood there, basket still in my hand, and watched it come. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be over 7 feet, easy. Its shoulders were enormous, rounded and powerful, like a professional wrestler's, but on a giant's frame. Its head was pointed, sort of conical, and it sloped back from its brow. It was covered in hair, long, stringy hair, the color of rusted iron with lighter, almost blonde streaks running through it, like it had been sun-bleached. And the sound. God, the sound. Its feet were hitting the wet pavement. They were bare, and the slapping noise was sharp and wet and incredibly fast. Slap, 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 slap. It wasn't a lumbering run, it was a sprint, a full-on, terrifying sprint right at me. It closed the distance in what felt like a single heartbeat. 1 second it was at the edge of the road, the next it was in the middle of it, and it stopped, just stopped dead. It went from a full-bore charge to a complete standstill in an instant, like it had hit an invisible wall. It was 100 feet away from me. I know that distance because I've paced it off in my head 1,000 times since. 100 feet, the width of the road, and a little more. It stood there, its chest heaving. I could hear its breathing, a heavy, rhythmic huff, 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 like a bellows. Its chest, massive and barrel-shaped, rose and fell with each breath. The air between us was absolutely still. That heavy, thick feeling was back, but now it was concentrated, focused on the space between me and this thing. I could smell it. A musky, wild smell, like a wet dog mixed with old leaves and something else, something deeply, fundamentally animal. My eyes were locked on it. I couldn't have looked away if my life depended on it. The fear was a physical thing inside me, a cold, hard knot in my gut that was spreading out, turning my fingers to ice, making my scalp crawl. Now that it was still, I could see details. The hair wasn't uniformly thick. On its chest and stomach, it was thinner, and I could see the skin underneath. It was a dark, grayish-brown color, like old leather. Its jaw was wide, and when it breathed, I could see the powerful muscles in its neck working. Its eyes were the worst part. They were deep set under a heavy, bony brow ridge, so shadowed I couldn't see any distinct color, just dark pits, but I could feel them looking at me. There was an intelligence there. This wasn't a dumb animal. It was assessing me, studying me. We stood like that for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, but time had stretched into something meaningless. There was just the thing, and me, and the sound of its breathing, and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Then it moved its head. It wasn't a jerky motion, it was slow, deliberate. It turned its head to its right, looking down the road, away from me. As it turned, I saw its profile more clearly. The pointed head, the lack of much of a neck, the sheer mass of it. It took two steps. That's all it took for it to cross both lanes of the road. Its legs were so long, its stride so immense that it just flowed across the pavement. It reached the other side, where there was a tangled patch of brush and small trees about 4 feet high. It didn't push through the brush. It didn't go around. It leaped. It just bent its knees slightly and jumped, clearing the entire patch, effortlessly, silently. It vanished into the dark wall of the woods on the other side. There was no crack of branches, no rustle of leaves. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible silhouette against the darker trees, and the next it was just gone. The woods swallowed it without a sound. I don't know how long I stood there after it disappeared. The spell was broken, but my body was slow to get the message. I was still frozen, my muscles trembling with a fine, uncontrollable vibration. The cold knot in my stomach was still there. The musky smell still hung in the air. Slowly, like a machine creaking back to life, I turned my head. I looked toward the tree line where the cattle had been. They were gone, too. The woods were empty and silent again. I had to get to my truck. It was parked down the road to my left, maybe a quarter of a mile away. I started walking. My legs felt like rubber, and I was shaking all over. I dropped my mushroom basket. I didn't even care. I just left it there on the shoulder of the road. I walked, keeping my eyes glued to the woods on my right, the side it had disappeared into. Every shadow seemed to move, every normal sound, the sigh of the wind in the pines, the creak of a branch, felt like a threat. My truck was the only thing in the world that mattered. It was safety. It was the real world. I was about halfway there when I heard the new sound. It came from the trees, from the same direction the thing had gone. It was a high-pitched chattering. It's hard to describe. It wasn't like a bird or a squirrel. It was faster, more complex. It sounded almost like speech, but not any language I've ever heard. A rapid, clicking, chittering sound, rising and falling in pitch. There was more than one of them. It sounded like a conversation. The fear, which had been a cold knot, suddenly turned into a sharp, stabbing terror. It wasn't alone. There were more. I didn't run. I was too afraid to run. I thought if I ran, it would trigger something. They would come out. So I just kept walking a little faster now, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The chattering continued, keeping pace with me from the deep shadows of the woods. It felt like they were talking about me, watching me walk away. I finally reached my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, hitting the lock button over and over again until I heard all the doors click. I jammed the key into the ignition, my vision blurry with unshed tears of pure panic. The engine turned over and roared to life. I didn't look back. I threw it into drive and stomped on the gas, the tires screeching on the pavement. I drove too fast all the way home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart still hammering against my ribs. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove in that terrified silence. The image of that thing burned into the back of my eyelids every time I blinked. I never went back to Storm Ranch to forage. I never even drove down that road again if I could help it. I told my wife I'd had a scare with a bear, and she accepted that. What else was I supposed to say? That was almost 20 years ago. I still think about it. Not every day, but often, especially on cool, overcast days in late October. I'll be in my backyard, and I'll hear a branch snap in the woods behind my house, and my heart will skip a beat. I'll stand perfectly still, listening. The memory of that charge, that standoff, that heavy breathing rushing back as fresh and as terrifying as if it happened yesterday. I know what I saw. I don't care what anyone else believes. I was there. I smelled it. I felt the vibration of its steps through the ground. I looked into those dark, deep-set eyes. That thing was real, and sometimes in the quiet of the night, I can still hear that high-pitched chattering, and I wonder if they're still out there talking about the day they saw me. Story 6. I was never the kind of guy who got spooked easily. Growing up in Pennsylvania, the woods were my backyard. I knew the sounds of a buck snorting, the the rustle of a raccoon in the leaves, the way an owl's call could cut through the quiet. But what happened that day, a little over 2 years ago now, scraped all that confidence right out of me. It left something else in its place, a cold, heavy kind of fear that I still feel sitting in my chest when I think about it. It was the last day of bow season, a Saturday in late October. The air had that crisp, clean smell that only comes in the fall, a mix of dead leaves and distant wood smoke. Me and 2 buddies had been out since before sunrise, posted up in different stands around the edge of this massive cornfield. The field belonged to a farmer we knew, and it was bordered on 3 sides by thick Pennsylvania woods. We'd been hunting this spot for years without any trouble bigger than a few ticks. We'd agreed to meet back at the trucks at dusk, using a tractor access road that cut between the field and the woods as our rally point. The light was starting to go, that long golden hour where everything looks soft and you have to squint to see details. I was the first one to the road. I leaned my bow against a fence post and just stood there for a minute, listening to the absolute quiet. It was one of those moments of pure peace, you know, the kind you take a mental picture of. Then I heard the crunch of boots on gravel. It was my buddy, Mark, coming from the north end of the field. He gave me a tired nod, unshouldering his pack. We didn't talk much, just stood there in that comfortable silence, waiting for our 3rd friend, Chris. We could hear him coming too. His footsteps were heavier, a little further off, but definitely getting closer from the direction of the southern wood line. That's when the world tore in half. It wasn't a scream from any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't a fox. It wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a dying rabbit. This came from a small, oval-shaped patch of woods, about 70 yards away from us, a little island of trees in the middle of the field. The sound erupted, and I mean erupted, like something had been ripped open. It was a high, shattering, female-sounding scream, but there was a raw power behind it that was just wrong. It was too loud, too full of hate, too intelligent. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of rage. My body went cold all over. It was like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my back. My heart didn't just start pounding. It felt like it was slamming against my ribs, trying to get out. I looked at Mark. His face was frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open, his eyes wide and fixed on that patch of woods. He had his hand halfway to the zipper on his jacket, and he just stopped, completely paralyzed. He wasn't even blinking. The scream didn't just stop. It shifted. It dropped from that ear-splitting shriek down into this deep, guttural, wet-sounding roar. It was low, so low I could feel it vibrating in my teeth. And then came the growls. They weren't like a dog's growl. They were deeper, more resonant, with this clicking, phlegmy undertone that made my skin crawl. Underneath it all, we could hear breathing, heavy, rhythmic, powerful breathing, like a horse after a hard run, but again, deeper, with more weight to it. The lung power it must have taken to make those sounds. It was immense, unnatural. While Mark was frozen solid, our other friend, Chris, just broke. The second that deep growling started, he let out this little strangled yelp and just took off running back down the access road the way he'd come. He was sprinting full tilt, his hunting pack bouncing on his back, not looking back. I could hear his frantic footsteps fading into the distance. Mark was still a statue. I reached out and grabbed his arm. His muscles were rigid like stone. "Mark," I whispered, and my own voice was thin and shaky. He didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on the woods. I was terrified, but seeing him like that, completely shut down, scared me in a different way. It was like his mind had just checked out to protect itself. The sounds from the woods kept going for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 or 40 seconds. The growling, that horrible wet breathing, it was like it was putting on a show for us. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was even heavier and more terrifying than the noise had been. It was a listening silence. That's when Mark finally moved. He shuddered, a full-body shake, and blinked. He looked at me, his eyes full of a confusion so deep it was almost childlike. What was that?" he breathed. Before I could even form a word, it screamed again. This one was different. It was closer. It felt directed. It was a shorter, sharper blast of sound, but it had the same terrifying power, the same intelligent fury. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement. That was all it took. The spell was broken. We both turned and ran. I didn't even think about my bow, still leaning against the fence post. We just ran. My legs felt like rubber, and I was sure I was going to trip and fall with every step. I could hear Mark right behind me, his breathing ragged. We hit the main gravel road where our trucks were parked, and Chris was already there, fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice in the dirt. His face was pale and slick with sweat. We didn't speak. We just piled into my truck, all three of us crammed in the front. I turned the key and slammed it into drive, spinning the tires on the gravel as I peeled out. We drove for 10 minutes in complete silence, just the sound of the engine and our own heavy breathing. Nobody looked back. We got to my place and went inside, still not talking. We just sat in my living room under the bright electric lights, and the reality of what we'd left behind started to sink in. My bow, our expensive gear, the story we'd have to tell. But more than that, the sheer, unexplainable horror of what we'd heard. We tried to rationalize it. A bear? No bear sounds like that. A mountain lion? They're not in this part of PA. And their screams, while scary, don't have that guttural talking quality. A prank? Who could possibly make a sound that loud, that powerful, from the middle of an empty woodlot at dusk? We finally started talking, our voices low, going over every detail, the way the sound seemed to vibrate in our chests, the way Mark had frozen, the sheer size of the sound, how it seemed to come from something with a chest cavity the size of a barrel. We didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, in the clear, cold light of a Sunday, a different feeling started to creep in, curiosity, a desperate, nagging need to know. I had to go back. I had to see. I told the guys I was going to retrieve my bow and our stuff. Mark just shook his head and said, "You're crazy." Chris wouldn't even talk about it, so I went alone. Driving back out there, my hands were tight on the steering wheel. The place looked so normal in the daylight, peaceful. The corn was golden, the sky was blue. It felt like the world had reset itself. I parked on the main road and walked down the tractor path, my heart thumping again, but this time with a nervous tension, not the blind terror from the night before. I found my bow right where I'd left it. I slung it over my shoulder, feeling a little foolish. Then I made myself look toward that oval patch of woods. From a distance, it looked fine. But as I got closer, maybe 20 yards out, I started to see it. The ground around the edge of the little woodlot was torn up. Not like an animal had been digging for grubs. This was different. It looked like something had been in a rage. There were huge gouges in the earth, long scrapes in the dirt and leaf litter. They were deep and they were big. I'm not exaggerating when I say some of these scrapes were the size of a small car hood. They weren't footprints, not that I could make out. Just these massive, violent disruptions in the ground, as if something enormous had been clawing at the earth, ripping it apart. I walked closer, my breath catching in my throat. The trees on the perimeter of the patch were scarred, too. About 7 or 8 feet up the trunks, there were long, deep gashes in the bark. The bark was just gone, shredded, showing the pale wood underneath. It was fresh. Sap was still oozing from some of the wounds. I didn't go into the woods. I stood right there at the edge, looking at the torn-up ground and the scarred trees, and the memory of those sounds came rushing back, crystal clear. This was physical. This was real. Something had been here. Something massive and unbelievably strong. I got out of there fast. I drove to the little gas station and convenience store at the crossroads a few miles away, my mind reeling. I needed a coffee, something to steady my hands. As I was paying, an older guy, a local I'd seen around but didn't know by name, was talking to the cashier. I wasn't really listening until I heard him say, "Weirdest damn thing, my bird dogs wouldn't go near the south edge of my property last night, whining and carrying on. Same thing this morning, just that one spot, down by the old cornfield, acted like the devil himself was in there." He was talking about the same area, the same patch of woods. I didn't say a word. I just took my coffee, walked out to my truck, and sat there for a long time. The evidence on the ground, the local story about his dogs. It all clicked into place with those horrific sounds. This wasn't a bear, this wasn't a known animal, this was something else, something that lived in the deep woods and didn't want to be known. That day changed everything for me. The wilderness I thought I knew, the comfortable, familiar woods I'd grown up in, suddenly had a shadow over it, a big, dark, silent shadow. I haven't gone bough hunting since. I still go for walks in the woods sometimes, but I never go alone. And I'm always listening, always watching the tree line. The fear hasn't gone away. It's just become a part of me now. I know what I heard. I know what I saw on the ground, and I know with a cold certainty that we are not alone out there. There are things in those woods that we don't understand. Things that are big and powerful and angry, and sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they let you know it. Story 7. It was spring of 1986, and I was working with a road crew out on Springville Road, down in the boggy bottoms of Lee County, South Carolina. The air was thick that day, thick with a wet heat that clung to your skin like a second shirt. You know the kind, where you're sweating just from breathing. We were there to clear some drainage ditches that had gotten choked up with all the spring growth and the usual muck that settles in those low, wet places. The ground was more water than dirt, a spongy black earth that sucked at your boots with every step. The smell was everywhere, that rich, decaying smell of swamp and old leaves, with a sour note of something else underneath, something wild. I was George Piler, and I'd been doing this kind of work for years. It was hard, honest work, and most days it was just boring. You'd spend hours in the mud, your back aching, the buzz of the insects a constant whine in your ears. That day was no different, at least not at the start. We'd been at it since sunup, and the afternoon was dragging on. The light was getting that long, golden quality, cutting through the cypress trees in sharp beams, making the Spanish moss look like it was on fire. I was taking a minute, leaning on my shovel, just catching my breath and wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my glove. My lower back was a solid ache. A familiar companion by that time of day. I was looking off into the trees, my mind a million miles away, probably thinking about a cold beer and getting my boots off, when something moved, just a flicker of motion in the deep shadows between the trunks, maybe 60, 70 yards away. My first thought, the automatic one, was a deer. We saw them all the time. They'd come down to the water's edge, cautious, their ears twitching. This was different, though. The movement was wrong. It wasn't the graceful, bounding step of a deer. It was more of a shift, a deliberate sliding from behind one wide cypress trunk to another. I squinted, trying to see through the tangle of undergrowth and the hanging curtains of moss. I could make out a shape, a dark shape, mostly hidden behind the tree. I remember thinking it must be a big buck, standing sideways, because I could see what looked like a haunch. But then my brain started to catch up with my eyes. The shape was too vertical. It wasn't standing sideways like a deer would. It was standing upright, facing me. And that's when I saw the face. It wasn't a deer's face. It was a face, but not a human one. It was peeking out from behind the tree, and it had these round, dark eyes. They weren't reflective like an animal's eyes. They were just dark, like two pools of shadow, but they were fixed right on me. I felt a cold trickle run down my spine, a feeling completely separate from the swamp's heat. Below the face, I could see its torso and arms. The arms were long, way too long, and they hung down past its knees. They were thick, covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, but they had a wiry strength to them, like an ape's arms. It was using one of those long arms to grip the side of the tree. Its fingers, I couldn't see them clearly, but I got the impression they were thick and strong, wrapped around the bark. My breath just stopped in my throat. I wasn't thinking Bigfoot or monster or anything like that. My mind was just a blank, white noise of pure confusion. What the hell is that? That was the only thought, repeating over and over. It was the wrongness of it. The body was human-shaped, bipedal, but everything else was off. The proportions were alien. The legs were skinny, weirdly skinny compared to the powerful-looking upper body, and they seemed too long for the torso. It was like someone had taken parts of different animals and stuck them together all wrong. We just stared at each other. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few seconds. Those few seconds stretched out into an eternity. The sounds of the swamp seemed to fade away. The insects, the distant calls of birds, the muttered conversations of the other guys on the crew. It was like someone had put the world on mute. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. All I could see was that face and those dark, round eyes looking right into me. There was no malice in its look, not exactly. It wasn't snarling or threatening. It was just watching, studying me. There was an intelligence there, a deep, unsettling awareness that was far beyond any bear or deer I'd ever seen. Then the spell broke. One of the guys, Ray, yelled something from behind me, something about calling it a day soon. The sound of his voice seemed to startle the creature. Its head twitched slightly, a quick bird-like movement, and then it moved. It didn't drop to all fours. It didn't lope like a gorilla. It pushed off from the tree and ran. It ran on two legs. The motion was so fast and so fluid, it was dizzying. Its long, skinny legs covered the ground in huge, loping strides, its body leaning forward, those absurdly long arms pumping at its sides. It didn't look back. It just vanished into the deeper swamp, weaving between the trees with a speed that was terrifying. The sound it made wasn't a roar or a scream. It was a kind of quick, heavy rustling, the sound of its feet hitting the wet ground and its body parting the ferns and brush, and then it was gone. The whole thing, from the time it started running to the time it disappeared into the gloom, took maybe 3 seconds. I stood there, frozen, my shovel still in my hand. The world's sounds rushed back in, louder than before, as if to fill the silence the thing had left behind. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. I could feel my hands shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. The sweat on my skin was cold now, icy cold. "George, you see a snake or something?" It was Ray walking up beside me. He was a big guy, built like a refrigerator, and he was wiping his face with a red bandana. I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the trees where it had been. My mouth was dry as dust. Ray squinted. "What, I don't see nothing?" It was right there," I managed to croak out. My voice didn't sound like my own. "What was?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual to concerned. "A bear. We get black bears out here sometimes." I shook my head, still trying to process it. No, it wasn't a bear. How could I even begin to describe it? It was a man, but it was an ape. It had a face with round eyes and arms that hung down to its knees. I sounded insane, even to myself. The rest of the crew had gathered around, sensing something was wrong. I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. I told them about the face, the eyes, the long arms, the way it ran on 2 legs. I could see the doubt on their faces. They were thinking heat stroke, or maybe I'd just spooked myself staring at a weird-shaped stump for too long. But then Old Man Jenkins, who'd been working these swamps his whole life, spoke up. He was quiet, didn't say much usually. He was looking at the ground where the creature had run. "You see the tracks?" he asked, his voice low. We all looked. The ground was soft and wet. And there they were, not deer tracks, not bear tracks. They were footprints, bipedal footprints. They were long, maybe 16, 18 inches and narrow. You could see the impression of an arch, and at the front where the toes would be, the mud was pushed up. They were sunk deep into the muck, far deeper than a man's would have been, suggesting a lot of weight. They led in a straight, purposeful line right into the heart of the swamp. No one said anything for a long time. The joking and the doubt were gone, replaced by a quiet, heavy unease. We all just stood there looking at those tracks, then looking at each other, then looking back into the darkening woods. The gold was gone from the light now, replaced by a deep, gloomy blue. The shadows between the trees looked solid, impenetrable. We packed up our tools in a hurry, not saying much. The normal clatter of metal sounded unnaturally loud. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves made us all jump and turn our heads. We were a crew of grown men, used to hard labor and the occasional danger of the job, and we were scared. Really, truly scared. It was a primal fear. The kind that sits in the pit of your stomach and whispers that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than you thought it was. The ride back to the depot was silent. Nobody turned on the radio. We just stared out the windows of the truck, watching the swamp flash by, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over, the way it stood, the way it looked at me, the sheer unnatural speed of it when it ran. That image of its long, skinny legs and its powerful swinging arms was burned into my mind. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those round, dark eyes. I'd jerk awake, my heart racing, convinced I'd heard something moving outside my window. The comfort of my own home felt thin, fragile. We went back to work on Springville Road a couple days later. We had to, but the feeling was different. We stuck closer together. We didn't wander off alone to take a leak. We were always scanning the tree line, our eyes searching the shadows. We never saw it again. We never found any more tracks. But the feeling of being watched never really went away. It was like we'd been given a glimpse behind a curtain, shown something we were never meant to see. And the knowledge of it was always there, hanging in the thick, humid air. That was almost 40 years ago now. I'm an old man. I've told this story a handful of times, mostly to people who just nod and smile, thinking it's the rambling of a senile old-timer. But I know what I saw. I can still see it as clear as I see this screen in front of me. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else, something that lives out there in those deep, boggy bottoms, something that knows we're here, and something that, for a few terrifying seconds, decided to let me know it was there too, and then it was just gone. Story 8. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I still can't sleep properly, and every time I close my eyes, I see those damn red-orange eyes staring back at me. This happened in the Rocky River Reservation in Ohio just a few weeks ago. My friend and I decided to go fishing there. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment things, you know. We both had the day off, and the weather was nice for once, not too hot, with a bit of a breeze that made the leaves rustle in a way that felt peaceful at first. We got there around mid-morning, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock. I remember the sun was already up, casting these dappled shadows through the trees, and the river was flowing gently, not too fast, so it was perfect for fishing. We found a spot along the bank where the water widened out to about 20 feet across, and the trees thinned a bit, giving us a clear view upstream and down. My friend had brought her own gear. She's been fishing since she was a kid, so she's pretty good at it. And I had my old rod that I've had for years. We set up our chairs, baited our hooks with some worms we'd picked up on the way, and just settled in. For the first couple of hours, it was totally normal. We didn't talk much. We were just enjoying the quiet, the sound of the water bubbling over rocks, and the occasional bird chirping. I remember feeling relaxed, my shoulders loosening up from the work week. We caught a couple of small fish, nothing big, just some sunfish and a bass, but we threw them back because we weren't really there for the catch. It was more about getting away from everything. Then, around noon, things started to feel a little off. Not in a big way at first, just this subtle shift in the atmosphere. The birds stopped chirping, and the woods got quieter, like someone had turned down the volume. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe a predator was nearby, like a hawk or something, but then we saw the deer. A small group of them, maybe 3 or 4, came down to the river to drink. They were on the opposite bank, about 50 feet away from us, and they crossed the river slowly, their legs splashing in the shallow parts. It was beautiful, honestly. They moved so gracefully, and for a minute it felt like we were part of some nature documentary. My friend pointed them out with a nod, and we both watched, smiling. But as they disappeared into the trees on our side, I kept my eyes on the opposite bank. That's when I saw the movement. At first, I thought it was another deer, maybe one that had lagged behind. It was in the same area where the deer had been, but it was taller, and it wasn't moving like a deer. It was standing upright, and it was big, really big. My brain tried to make sense of it like, oh, it's just a bear or something, but bears don't stand like that, not for long anyway. Then it stepped out from behind a tree, and I got a full view. This thing was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders that made it look powerful, almost like a bodybuilder. Its body was covered in thick black fur that looked matted in places like it had been through brush or mud. But the worst part was its eyes. They were reddish-orange, and they caught the light in a way that made them glow, like when you shine a flashlight on an animal's eyes at night. Except it was daytime, and the sun was out, so there was no reason for them to be reflecting like that. They were just fixed on us, unblinking. I froze. Completely froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands went cold and clammy. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. I just stared back, and for what felt like an eternity, we were locked in this silent standoff. The creature didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly, like it was studying us. I could see its shape clearly. It was human-like, but not human. The arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and the legs were thick and muscular. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen, not even in pictures. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my friend shift. She must have seen it too, because she dropped her fishing rod with a clatter that snapped me out of my daze for a second. She didn't say a word, just grabbed her gear, her backpack, and took off running back toward the trail we'd come from. She moved so fast, it was like she'd been launched. Her chair tipped over, and I heard her footsteps crunching on leaves and twigs, fading quickly. That's when the shock wore off for me. Adrenaline hit me like a wave, and I finally managed to move. I snatched up my own gear, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped everything. I didn't look back at the creature. I was too scared to, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my back. I started running, following the path my friend had taken. The trail was uneven, with roots and rocks sticking out, and I wasn't wearing the best shoes for running. I stumbled almost immediately, my foot catching on a root, and I went down hard. My knee scraped against something sharp, probably a rock, and I felt a sting of pain, but I didn't care. I scrambled back up, my heart racing so fast I thought it might give out. As I ran, I kept expecting to hear something behind me, footsteps, growling, anything, but it was dead silent. That made it worse, because my mind started filling in the blanks. What if it was following me? What if it was fast? I didn't dare look back. I just focused on getting to the car. The trail seemed longer than it had on the way in, like it had stretched out, and every shadow in the woods felt like it was moving. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the blood pounding in my ears. When I finally burst out of the trees into the parking lot, I saw my friend's car. She was already inside in the driver's seat, and the engine was running. I yanked the door open and threw myself in, slamming it shut behind me. She was pale, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. She was shaking, and I could see tears in her eyes. Neither of us said anything for a minute. We just sat there, breathing heavily like we'd run a marathon. Then she put the car in drive and peeled out of there, gravel flying behind us. We didn't speak until we were on the main road, and even then it was just her saying, "I'm never going back there, ever." Her voice was shaky, and I just nodded, because I felt the same way. My whole body was trembling, and my knee was throbbing where I'd fallen. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing us. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the trees fading into the distance. We drove for about 20 minutes in silence before either of us could really talk. When we did, it was just to confirm what we'd seen. She described the same thing I did, the height, the fur, those eyes. We both knew it wasn't a bear or a person in a costume. It was too real, too alive. The way it moved was fluid, like it belonged there. And the intensity of its stare was something I'll never forget. It felt intelligent, like it was assessing us, and that's what creeps me out the most. I've tried to rationalize it since then. Maybe it was a hoax or a big dog or something, but nothing fits. The Rocky River Reservation is a public park, but it's surrounded by woods, and there are stories about weird sightings, though I never paid them much mind before. Now I can't stop thinking about it. I've had nightmares where I'm back there, frozen, and those red-orange eyes are getting closer. I wake up sweating, my heart racing, and it takes me a while to calm down. What really gets me is that we didn't hear anything. No sounds, no growls, no breaking branches. It was just there, silent and watching, and the way it stepped out so deliberately, like it had been waiting for us to notice it. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know that I'll never set foot in that reservation again. My friend and I haven't talked about it much since. It's like we're both trying to forget, but we can't. Every time I see a deer or hear the wind in the trees, I get this chill down my spine, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. I guess I'm sharing this because I need to know if anyone else has seen something like that around there, or if I'm just going crazy. But deep down, I know what I saw, and it was real. And that's the scariest part. Story 9. We were sitting in our camp chairs by the fire pit, which was just glowing embers at that point. The lake was like black glass, reflecting a sky full of more stars than you ever see in the city. It was so quiet you could hear the little waves lapping at the shore, a sound that usually just makes me feel peaceful and sleepy. My husband had his arm around me, and I was leaning into him, just content. Our friends were joking about something one of them had done earlier that day, and we were all in that warm, tired, happy place you get to at the end of a long, good day. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't just a bad smell. It was a physical presence. It was this overwhelming, pungent stench of rotten skunk and wet dog, but 100 times stronger. It was so thick, it felt like I was breathing it in, like a fog. It came from the west bank, from the deep woods that run right up to the water's edge over there. I sat up straight, and my husband did too. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Our friends stopped talking. We all just sat there for a second, sniffing the air, our noses wrinkling. It was awful. It made my eyes water a little. Then from the complete opposite side of the lake, from the east, came this god-awful crashing sound. It wasn't a deer. I've heard deer run through the woods. This was heavier, much heavier. It was the sound of something big moving through the undergrowth, not even trying to be quiet. It was the sound of branches snapping, not little twigs, but thick ones, like something was just shoving trees out of its way. The sound seemed to be moving along the tree line parallel to the water. We all froze. The happy, sleepy feeling was gone, ripped away in an instant. We were all on our feet now, staring into the blackness of the woods on the east side, but we couldn't see a thing. The tree line was just a solid wall of shadow. The crashing stopped for a second, and in that silence, The smell from the west seemed to get even stronger. It was confusing. How could the smell be over there but the noise over here? My heart was starting to thump hard in my chest, a dull, fast rhythm I could feel in my ears. Then it happened. There was a loud, deep thwump sound from the east woods, and a split second later, a huge splash out on the lake, maybe 30 feet from shore. Water shot up into the air, a black geyser against the slightly less black sky. We all jumped. "What was that?" my friend whispered, her voice tight with fear. We were all squinting, trying to see. One of our kayaks was tied up out there, a bright yellow one, and it started rocking violently from the waves. My husband, who's always the practical one, grabbed the big maglite we keep by the fire pit and shone it out towards the splash. The beam danced over the choppy water, but there was nothing there, just the kayak bobbing. "Something fell in," he said, his voice low. "A dead branch from a tree or something." But it didn't sound like a branch. It sounded solid, heavy. We stood there for what felt like a full minute, just listening. The woods had gone dead silent again. Not even the crickets were chirping. That was the second thing that really got to me. The absolute silence from the woods. It was like every living thing out there was holding its breath or had run away. Then came the second one. This time there was no mistaking it. There was a grunt, a low guttural sound of effort from the trees, followed immediately by that same thwump. This rock, if that's what it was bigger. It flew out of the darkness in a high arc, and it landed with a tremendous cannonball splash, not 10 feet from the kayak. The spray soaked the boat. This thing was the size of a German shepherd. No branch, no accident. Something was out there, and it was throwing rocks the size of a large dog into the lake, right near our stuff. Panic hit me then, a cold, sharp feeling in my gut. This wasn't a person playing a prank. No person could throw a rock that big that far. "Get in the cabin," my husband said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He was already moving towards our tent, but he changed direction and went for the car instead. We have a little pop-up camper, but our gear was still scattered around the fire pit. Our friends didn't need to be told twice. They were already scrambling towards the small one-room cabin we had access to about 50 yards back from the shore. My husband popped the trunk of the car and pulled out his shotgun. The sound of him racking a shell into the chamber was the most terrifying and reassuring sound I've ever heard. He also grabbed a box of bottle rockets we hadn't set off earlier. "What are you doing?" I hissed at him, my own voice shaky. "Creating a distraction, maybe scaring it off," he said, his eyes scanning the tree line. He was scared. I could see it in the tight line of his jaw, but he was focused. He lit one of the bottle rockets and aimed it not at the sky, but sideways, skimming it over the surface of the lake towards the east bank. It zipped across the water, hissing and spitting sparks, and disappeared into the trees. For a second, nothing happened. Then, as the last spark died, he shone the maglite towards the spot where the rocket had gone in, and that's when we saw it. It was peeking out from behind a thick oak tree, just its head and one shoulder. The beam of the flashlight caught it perfectly. It was stocky. That's the first word that came to my mind. Not tall and lanky, but built solid like a power lifter. It was covered in hair, a light brown, almost dirty blonde color that looked matted and shaggy. But its face was where my brain just stopped working properly. It was darker, more like leather, and it had these eyes. They were a dark, glowing yellow, not like an animal's eyes reflecting light. They seemed to be producing their own faint, sickly light. They were set deep under a heavy brow, and they were locked right on us. It was rocking, just slightly, side to side, a slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't a nervous tick. It felt menacing, a deliberate show of something. I don't know what. Aggression, curiosity, I don't know. But it froze me to the spot. My husband saw it too. I heard his sharp intake of breath. He kept the light on it, and his other hand tightened on the shotgun. He didn't raise it to shoot. He just held it ready. We were both paralyzed, just staring at this thing staring back at us from behind a tree. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen or even imagined. It was maybe 4.5, 5 feet tall, but the sheer mass of it was terrifying. The smell was still there, that awful skunk stench, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere now, like the air itself was poisoned. Then, from the south, from further down the lake, came a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a whoop, a deep, resonant, 3-note call. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a coyote, it was a whoop. A clear, intelligent sound that cut through the silence. It sounded close. The second that sound ended, the creature behind the tree stopped rocking. Its yellow eyes seemed to narrow, and then it just moved. It didn't run. It turned its head towards the sound, then back to us for a split second, and then it melted back into the shadows. It was unbelievably fast and fluid for something so solid. 1 second it was there, the next, the space behind the tree was empty. My husband swept the light back and forth across the tree line, but there was nothing, just trees and darkness. "Get to the cabin. Now," he said, and this time I listened. My legs felt like jelly, but I ran. He backed up the whole way, the flashlight beam jerking around, the shotgun held ready. He was breathing hard. We got inside the cabin and barred the door. It's an old place, not very sturdy, but it felt like a fortress in that moment. Our friends were huddled on the old couch, their faces pale. We didn't say anything for a long time, we just listened. The woods had gone quiet again, no crashing, no whooping. But the smell lingered for hours. It seeped in through the cracks around the windows, a constant reminder that whatever was out there, it was still there. We didn't sleep, not a wink. We sat there in the dark, the only light coming from the moon through the window. My husband sat in a chair by the door, the shotgun across his lap, just staring at the wood. Every few minutes, one of us would whisper something, replaying what we'd seen. Did you see its eyes? How big was that rock? What was that whooping sound? We were trying to make sense of it, to find some logical explanation, but there wasn't one. We all saw the same thing. We all heard the same thing. And then, maybe an hour or two later, the other sound started. It started as a kind of crying, not a human baby, but something close, a high, whimpering sob that seemed to come from different directions. It would be off to the left for a while, then stop, and then start up again from the right. It was unnerving, but it was the screams that truly broke us. They were distant but clear, primal, shrieking screams that didn't sound like any animal I know. They sounded angry, they sounded like they were communicating, and they made it perfectly clear that there wasn't just one of them out there. There were multiple. They were surrounding us. We spent the rest of the night like that, trapped in that little cabin, jumping at every creak of the old building, listening to the crying and the screaming ebb and flow in the woods around us. The only thing that kept me from completely losing my mind was the slow, gradual lightening of the sky outside the window. When the first real rays of sunlight finally cut through the trees, the sound stopped. Just like that. The forest went back to its normal morning sounds of birds and squirrels. We waited until the sun was fully up before we dared to open the door. The smell was gone. The world looked normal, beautiful even. We went down to the shore. Everything was where we left it, except for the 2 huge new rocks sitting on the bottom of the lake near the kayak, pale and alien against the dark mud. We packed up our entire camp in less than 20 minutes, throwing everything into the cars in a frantic, silent hurry. We didn't even make coffee. We just got in and drove away, and none of us have ever talked about going back. That was 3 years ago. I still can't go camping. I get nervous if I'm in my own backyard after dark. I see those yellow eyes in my dreams, and I hear that whooping sound, and I know, with a certainty that sits like a cold stone in my stomach, that we were not alone out there. Something was watching us, something intelligent enough to throw rocks, to communicate, and to surround our camp in the dark, and I have no idea what it was. Story 10. I still can't believe I'm typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened years ago, but it feels like yesterday. We were on a family vacation at Fort Wilderness in Disney World, Orlando, Florida. You know, the place that's supposed to be all magic and happiness. It was the early 2000s, and we'd saved up for this trip for what felt like forever. My husband, our 3 kids and I were crammed into a pop-up camper in the Cottontail Curl section. The plan was to have a relaxing week, but from the start, it was anything but. The heat was brutal, like walking into a wet blanket every time you stepped outside. The humidity clung to you, making your clothes stick and your skin feel grimy. Because of that, the campground was nearly empty. I mean, there were maybe 1 or 2 other families around, but most people had bailed or stayed in the air-conditioned hotels. We were trying to rough it, I guess, but I regretted it almost immediately. That particular day started off rough. The sun was blazing by 7 in the morning, and the inside of the camper felt like an oven, even with the windows cracked. My husband and I had been bickering about little things. The heat was making everyone irritable. Our son, who was around 7 at the time, had been complaining about a stomachache since the night before. By afternoon, it hadn't gotten any better, so my husband decided to take him to the hospital to get it checked out. Nothing serious, just a minor thing, but we didn't want to take chances. That left me alone with our 2 daughters, who were 2 and 4 years old. I remember feeling a bit relieved when they left because the camper would be less crowded, but also nervous about being by myself in such an isolated spot. After they drove off, I tried to keep the girls entertained. We played with some toys on the floor of the camper, but it was so hot that the plastic felt sticky. I gave them popsicles to cool down, and they ended up with red syrup all over their faces and hands. The camper was a basic pop-up model, you know, the kind with canvas sides that zip up. It had a bunk bed where the girls slept, and a small table that converted into another bed. We'd parked it right near a canal that ran behind the sites. The water was dark and murky, with weeds floating on the surface, and every now and then you'd hear a splash, probably from fish or turtles, but mostly it was just still and quiet, except for the buzzing of insects. Mosquitoes were everywhere, and I'd been slathering us all in bug spray, but it only helped so much. As the afternoon dragged on, the heat didn't let up. I kept the windows unzipped a little to get some airflow, but it didn't do much. The girls were getting cranky, so I put them down for a nap around 2 o'clock. They fell asleep pretty quickly, exhausted from the heat and the travel. I sat on the edge of the bunk, just watching them sleep and listening to the sounds outside. It was so quiet, too quiet. Normally, at a campground, you'd hear people laughing or cars driving by, but here it was just the insects and occasional bird calls. I remember feeling a little creeped out, but I brushed it off as just being alone in a strange place. When the sun started to set, the temperature dropped a bit, but the humidity stayed. The sky turned orange and pink, and the shadows grew long. I unzipped the side windows about a foot to let in more air. One of the windows faced the canal, and I could see the water glinting in the fading light. It should have been peaceful, but there was something off about it. The air felt heavy, and the sounds from the canal seemed louder than before. Every splash made me jump a little. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was being silly because I was alone. Once it got fully dark, around 8 o'clock, I put the girls to bed for the night. They were tired out from the day, so they fell asleep almost immediately. I stayed up, sitting on the bunk near the window, just trying to cool down. I had a book with me, but I couldn't concentrate. Instead, I just listened. The insects were buzzing loudly, like a constant hum, and every now and then there'd be a bigger splash from the canal, maybe a frog or something jumping in. I remember thinking about bears because we'd seen signs warning about them in the area, but I figured they'd stay away from people. Still, the thought nagged at me. Then, around 9 o'clock, everything changed. I was just sitting there, staring into the darkness, when I heard it. At first, it was just a low rumble like something heavy moving. But then it turned into this deep, heavy breathing mixed with a growl. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a dog, not a cat. Nothing. It was coming from right outside the window, near the canal. The sound was so close, it felt like it was right in my ear. I froze. My whole body went stiff and I couldn't move. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The breathing was slow and deliberate, like whatever it was taking its time. And the growl was low and guttural, almost like it was pissed off. I don't know how long I sat there, but it felt like forever. Then, without even thinking, I shouted, "Get out of here!" My voice came out shaky and too loud, but I meant it. As soon as I yelled, the noise stopped. Just like that. Complete silence. It was so quiet that the absence of sound was almost louder than the noise itself. The insects had stopped buzzing, and there were no more splashes from the canal. It was like everything in the world had frozen. That's when my daughters woke up. The sudden silence or my shouting must have startled them, because they both started crying at the same time. The 2-year-old was wailing, and the 4-year-old was whimpering, calling for me. I scrambled over to them, my hands trembling, and gathered them into my arms. I was so scared I could barely breathe. I kept expecting to hear something else, footsteps, more growling, anything, but there was nothing, just that eerie silence. I held my girls close, and we huddled together on the bunk. I didn't dare look outside. The window was still unzipped about a foot, and all I could see was blackness. I thought about zipping it shut, but I was too terrified to move. What if whatever was out there was still there, waiting? My mind raced through possibilities. A bear, but the sound had come from up high, at least 7 feet off the ground, because the camper's peak was about 8 feet, and it sounded like it was right at window level. That meant whatever it was had to be tall, really tall. Bears don't stand that high for long, do they? And I never heard it walk away. No rustling, no footsteps, nothing. It was like it vanished. The rest of the night was pure torture. Every little noise made me jump, a leaf rustling, the camper creaking as it cooled down. I kept the girls wrapped in my arms, and we stayed like that for hours. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there listening, my eyes glued to the window. The darkness felt alive, like it was pressing in on us. I could feel the sweat on my back, but it was cold sweat, not from the heat. My legs were cramping from sitting in one position, but I didn't dare move. I kept thinking about my husband and son, wondering when they'd be back, but I had no way to contact them. This was before everyone had cell phones, and we didn't have one with us. At some point, the insects started up again, and the normal night sounds returned, but I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that breathing and growling in my head. The girls eventually fell back asleep, but I stayed awake, watching the window. The moon came out, casting faint shadows, and I saw nothing moving, but that didn't help. I felt like I was being watched. It's hard to explain, but it was this primal fear deep in my gut. I've never been so scared in my life. When the sun finally started to rise, it was a relief, but I was still on edge. The light filtered in through the windows, and I could see the canal outside. Everything looked normal, the water, the trees, the sand, but I had to check. Once the girls were awake and playing quietly with their toys, I gathered my courage and unzipped the door slowly. I stepped outside, my heart still racing. The air was cool and damp, and the ground was soft under my feet. I walked around to the side where the window was, near the canal. The sand there was disturbed, but not in a clear way. There were vague marks, like something heavy had been standing there, but no distinct footprints. No claw marks, no animal tracks, just depressions in the sand that could have been from anything. I looked up at the window. It was about 7 feet off the ground, and I realized that whatever it was, it would have been tall enough to peer right in. The thought made my skin crawl. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring at the marks, trying to make sense of it. But there was nothing. No evidence, no explanation. My husband and son returned later that morning, and I told them what happened. My husband thought it was probably a bear or a large raccoon, but he could see how shaken I was. We ended up cutting the trip short and leaving that day. I never felt the same about camping after that. For years, I pushed it to the back of my mind, but it always bothered me. Then, one night, I was watching a documentary on Bigfoot, and they played recordings of vocalizations. When I heard that deep, guttural growl and the heavy breathing, my blood ran cold. It was exactly what I heard that night. I know it sounds crazy, but in that moment, I knew. Whatever was outside our camper wasn't a bear. It was something else, something big and intelligent enough to stop when I shouted and to disappear without a trace. I still don't have any answers, and I probably never will. But that night at Fort Wilderness, something was out there watching us, and I'll never forget the terror of feeling so completely helpless. Story 11. Okay, I need to get this out. I've been carrying this around for more than 20 years, and I've only ever told a couple of people who mostly just humored me. But I know what I saw. I wasn't a dumb kid. I wasn't prone to lying, and I wasn't dreaming. This happened. It was late summer, the tail end of August. I was 10 years old. We lived out in the sticks in Washington, not far from the Cascade foothills. Our property backed up against what seemed like an endless wall of pine and fir trees, a real deep, dark woods that my dad was always warning me not to go into too far. That day, I was out back behind the house in this field we had. It wasn't a manicured lawn or anything. It was a big, wild field of tall grass and weeds that came up to my chest, dotted with blackberry brambles and the occasional sad-looking oak tree. The sun was starting to go down. You know that time of day, where the light gets all thick and golden, and the long shadows from the trees stretch out across the ground like fingers. It was that time. The air was warm, but had that little bite to it that said summer was almost over. School was going to start again in a couple weeks. I was just killing time, bored, with nothing to do. My parents were inside, probably watching the news or making dinner. I was chasing a grasshopper, a big, dumb one that kept launching itself out of the grass with these loud clicks. I'd see a patch of grass shake. I'd sneak over and then, psst, it would fly off a few feet away. I wasn't trying to catch it or hurt it. I was just bored, and it was something to focus on. I remember the feeling of the dry grass stalks whipping against my jeans, the smell of dust and dry earth, the sound of crickets starting up their evening chorus. This one time, the grasshopper landed near the edge of the field, right where the tall grass met the first line of trees. I crept up, trying to be quiet, my eyes locked on the spot where I'd seen it disappear, and that's when I saw the shape. At first, I honestly thought it was a deer. We had a lot of deer around. This was a big, dark shape, maybe 40, 50 feet away, moving slowly, parallel to the tree line. It was partially hidden by the grass and the shadows from the pines. I froze, thinking if I stayed still, the deer wouldn't see me and I could get a better look. My heart was thumping a little bit from the surprise, but it was a good kind of thrill, you know, seeing a wild animal up close. But then it stepped out from behind a thicker clump of alder bushes, and the bottom just dropped out of my stomach. It wasn't a deer. It was huge. I mean, impossibly huge. It had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. It was standing on 2 legs, just like a person, but there was nothing human about it. Its body was covered in this matted, shaggy fur, a really dark brown, almost black in the shadows. It wasn't clean fur like a bear's. It was tangled, like it had been pushing through thickets and brambles for years, with bits of leaves and twigs caught in it. The proportions were wrong. The arms were way too long, hanging down past its knees. Its shoulders were massive, hunched and powerful looking, and its head, God, its head, it wasn't round like a person's. It was kind of elongated, coming up to a point at the top, like a cone, but a soft one. It didn't have a visible neck. Its head just seemed to sit right on its shoulders. I couldn't see its face clearly because it was looking away from me towards the woods, but I could see the profile, a heavy brow ridge, a flat nose. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a quick, jerky movement. It was slow, deliberate, and as it turned, the last of the setting sun caught its eyes. They weren't glowing or anything demonic like in the movies. They were just deep set, and they caught the light in a way that was intelligent. That's the only word for it. It wasn't the blank stare of a cow or the sharp, predatory gaze of a coyote. There was an awareness there, a deep, ancient kind of knowing. It looked right through the trees, like it was checking for something, scanning the woods. I stopped breathing. I'm not being dramatic. I literally forgot to breathe. My lungs just locked up. Every single kid instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something. But I was frozen solid. It was like my feet were bolted to the ground. I could feel the cold from the earth seeping up through the soles of my sneakers, a weird, sharp contrast to the warm air. My fingers were tingling. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, a whooshing sound that drowned out the crickets. It took a step. Not towards me, thank God. It took a step away, towards the deep woods. But the way it moved, that's something I'll never forget. It didn't walk heavily like a man would. It wasn't clumsy. It was careful. Its foot, I couldn't see its feet clearly in the grass, but I saw the leg move. It placed its foot down with this eerie precision, like it was trying not to make a sound. It was a rolling gait, powerful and smooth, all that muscle moving under that thick fur. It took another step, and then another, and it was melting into the shadows of the trees. The way it moved through the undergrowth was unnatural. It should have been snapping branches, rustling leaves loudly, but it wasn't. It was almost silent, just a soft, shushing sound as it parted the ferns and disappeared between two massive fir trees. The second it was out of sight, the spell broke. I stumbled backwards, my legs feeling like wet noodles. I didn't turn my back on the tree line. I just backed up, step by shaky step, my eyes glued to the spot where it had vanished. I was waiting for it to come back out, for those deep-set eyes to find me again. The golden light was gone now, and the woods were a wall of pure black. Every shadow looked like a moving shape. Every rustle of a leaf in the breeze made me jump. I backed up all the way across the field, through the tall grass, until my heels hit the gravel of our driveway. The sharp crunch of the stones under my feet was somehow reassuring. A man-made sound. I finally turned and ran for the back door, yanking it open and slamming it shut behind me, twisting the deadbolt with fumbling fingers. My mum was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. "You're letting the bugs in," she said without looking up. I just stood there, leaning against the door, my chest heaving. I could smell the familiar smell of our house, stew cooking, pine-scented cleaner. But it felt alien to me now. The safety of those four walls felt like a lie. The world outside was different. It was wrong. "Did you have fun outside?" she asked. I opened my mouth. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream. "There's a monster in the woods, a giant, hairy man thing." But the words wouldn't come. I looked at her normal, everyday face, and I knew with a cold, certain clarity that she wouldn't believe me. I was 10. I had an imagination. I'd been watching too much TV. She'd pat me on the head and tell me it was probably just a big buck. So I just swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust, and said, "Yeah, it was fine." I went up to my room and looked out the window, the one that faced the back field. It was full dark now. The woods were just a black pit. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, staring out, expecting to see a massive dark shape emerge from the trees and stand at the edge of the grass, looking up at my window. It never did. But everything changed for me after that. I never played in that field again. I wouldn't even take the trash out to the bin at the edge of the driveway after dark. I started having nightmares, not of monsters with fangs and claws, but of that slow, deliberate turn of the head and the way its eyes caught the light. The woods weren't a place of adventure anymore. They were a place of hiding. I started noticing things I never had before. Weird, broken branches way higher up than a deer could reach. Or strange, deep footprints in the mud down by the creek after a rain. Footprints that were way too big to be a bear's. As I got older, into my teens, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with mange, standing on its hind legs. Maybe it was a trick of the light, my imagination, but I always came back to the same thing. I knew what bears looked like. I knew what elk looked like. This was neither. The way it moved, the proportions, the sheer silent mass of it. It was something else. I'm an adult now. I have a job, a mortgage, responsibilities. I've read the stories online, the accounts from other people. I've seen the blurry photos and the shaky videos. And I know, with a conviction that's bone deep, what I saw that late summer evening when I was 10 years old. It was a Bigfoot. There's no other explanation that fits. It wasn't aggressive, it didn't charge me, it didn't roar. It just was. It existed. And for one long, terrifying minute, our worlds overlapped. It saw me, I'm sure of it. It knew I was there. And it just chose to walk away into the deepening shadows of the Washington woods. I still get a tightness in my chest when I think about it. I still can't walk alone in a deep forest at dusk. Because I know they're out there. And sometimes they're watching. Story 12. I'll never forget that day. I was just a kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I was up at my cousin's place near Cogan House Township in Pennsylvania. It's all woods out there, real deep woods that feel old, you know, the kind where the trees are so thick in some spots the sunlight barely hits the ground. My cousin was a couple years older than me, and we were always getting into something outside. Our big project that summer was this trout-holding pool we were building by a small stream that ran through the woods behind his house. The stream was maybe 10, 12 feet across at its widest, but mostly it was just a shallow, rocky creek you could hop across if you tried. It cut through this patch of forest that eventually gave way to a real swampy area, all wet ground and tall, skinny trees sticking up out of the muck. The air always smelled different over by the swamp, damp and earthy like wet leaves and something else, something a little rotten. But by the stream it was nice. You could hear the water trickling over the rocks, and the birds were always chattering away. That day my cousin had run back to the house to grab some more tools. We were using an old shovel with a splintery handle, and our hands mostly. I was kneeling in the cool mud on the bank, my jeans already soaked through from the knees down. The water was crystal clear. I remember staring down at the pebbles on the bottom, thinking how perfect they looked, all smooth and grey. I was trying to pile up some of the bigger, flatter stones to make a wall, to slow the water down and make a deeper spot for the fish. My hands were numb from the cold water, and I had that good, tired feeling you get when you're a kid and you've been working hard at something you think is important. I was focused on a particular rock, one that was half buried in the stream bed. I was wiggling it back and forth, the cold water rushing around my wrists, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The water upstream was changing. It was getting cloudy. Not just a little stirred up, but a thick, muddy brown, like someone had dumped a bucket of dirt into it a little ways up. I sat back on my heels, curious. Maybe a deer had crossed the stream further up. We saw them all the time. I wiped my wet hands on my already filthy jeans and looked up, following the cloud of mud as it drifted downstream towards me. And that's when I saw it, across the stream on the other bank, maybe 7 feet away from me, so close I could have almost reached out and touched it if the water wasn't between us. Something was standing there. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear. It was tall, so much taller than me. It had to be 7, 8 feet tall at least. It was covered in hair, this long, shaggy, dark, brownish-black hair that looked almost wet in places, like it had just come out of the swamp. Its body was huge, with these massive shoulders that looked like they were made of solid muscle. But it was the face that stopped my heart dead in my chest. It wasn't a snout. It wasn't a muzzle. It was a face, a bare face, with dark, leathery-looking skin, like a gorilla's but different, flatter, and it had eyes, dark, deep-set eyes that were just looking right at me. They weren't glowing red or anything crazy like in the movies. They were just dark, and they were locked onto me. My whole body just froze. It was like every single part of me, from my toes to my scalp, turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My lungs felt like they were made of stone. My mouth was hanging open, but no sound came out. All the little kid noises, the birds, the stream, the wind in the leaves, they all just vanished. The world went completely, utterly silent. The only thing that existed was me and this thing staring at each other over this little stream. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl. It didn't huff. It just stood there, perfectly still. Its arms were long, hanging down by its sides, and I remember seeing its hands. They weren't paws, they were big, with thick fingers. It just looked solid, like a tree that had decided to get up and walk. It was the most real, most physically present thing I had ever seen, and it was also the most impossible. My brain was screaming. It was a jumble of words that didn't form sentences, just pure white-hot terror. What is that? What is that? What is that? Get away, run, run, run. But my body wouldn't listen. I was a statue. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping that felt like it was going to shake me apart. The cold from the wet knees of my jeans suddenly felt like it was seeping up into my whole body. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been 2 seconds. It could have been a minute. Time didn't mean anything. I was trapped in that single horrifying moment. Its eyes held me there. They didn't look angry. They didn't look mean. They just looked aware. It was looking at me and it knew I was looking back. That was the worst part. The intelligence in that look. This wasn't some dumb animal that had wandered by. This was something that was seeing me, just like I was seeing it. A thought, a desperate kid-logic thought finally broke through the panic. My cousin. Get my cousin. My eyes, against every screaming instinct in my body, flickered away from its face. I turned my head just a fraction, just enough to look back over my shoulder towards the path that led to the house. My throat was so tight I could barely get the air out. "Hey," I tried to call. It came out as a dry, raspy whisper. I swallowed, my throat clicking. "Hey!" That was all I could manage. I whipped my head back around to face the stream, my heart in my throat, expecting it to be closer, expecting it to have crossed the water while my back was turned. But it was gone, just gone. The space where it had been standing was empty. The ferns on the other bank were undisturbed. There was no sound of crashing through the brush. Nothing. It had just vanished, like it had never been there at all. The world rushed back in. The sound of the stream was deafening. A bird chirped somewhere, and it sounded like a scream. The mud on my hands felt slimy and gross. I scrambled backwards, my hands and feet slipping in the mud, not caring that I was sitting right in it, not caring about anything except putting distance between me and that other bank. I couldn't get my legs to work right. They were like rubber. I just sat there in the mud, staring at the empty spot, my chest heaving. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my bones. I kept staring, waiting for it to reappear, waiting for those dark eyes to look at me from between the trees. But there was nothing. Just the normal woods, the normal stream, the normal muddy water that was now clearing, the cloud of sediment having drifted past me. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the path. My cousin came jogging back into the clearing, the old shovel slung over his shoulder. "Got it," he said, sounding proud of himself. Then he saw me sitting in the mud, my face probably white as a sheet. "What happened to you?" You fall in. I just stared at him. My mouth was still dry. I tried to form the words to tell him what I saw, but it sounded so stupid in my head. A big hairy man was standing there. He'd laugh at me. There was something, I finally stammered, pointing a shaky finger across the stream. He looked. What? A deer! I shook my head, the movement feeling jerky and unnatural. No, bigger. It had a face. He squinted, shielding his eyes from the sun dappling through the leaves. I don't see anything. You're seeing things. He dropped the shovel on the bank. Come on, let's finish this wall. He started piling up rocks like nothing had happened. I couldn't move. I just stayed there, glued to the spot, my eyes scanning the tree line. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every rustle of a leaf made me jump. The woods, which had always been our playground, felt different. They felt watchful. Seriously, I said, my voice a little stronger now, but still shaky. It was right there. It was huge, and it looked at me. He finally stopped what he was doing and looked at me again, really looked at me. He saw that I was genuinely scared, not just messing around. What did it look like? I described it as best I could. The height, the hair, the bare, human-like face, the dark eyes, the utter silence. As I talked, the fear came rushing back, fresh and cold. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that just seeing it hadn't. It wasn't just a scary picture in my head anymore. It was something that had actually happened. My cousin listened, his own playful mood gone. He looked across the stream again, his expression now serious. The woods were suddenly very, very quiet. The birds had stopped singing again. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he just said, "We should go." He didn't have to tell me twice. We left everything right there. The shovel, the half-built wall, the rocks we'd piled up. We didn't run at first, just walked fast. But with every step, the urge to run got stronger. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see that massive, hairy shape moving between the trees, keeping pace with us. By the time we broke out of the tree line and saw the back of his house, we were both sprinting, our lungs burning. We burst into the kitchen, breathing hard. My mum was there, washing dishes. She took one look at us, at our muddy clothes and our panicked faces, and asked what was wrong. I tried to tell her. I spilled it all out in a jumbled mess. The stream, the mud in the water, the creature, the face, the eyes. I was talking so fast my words were tripping over each other. She listened with a patient smile on her face, the kind you give a kid who's just told you there's a monster under the bed. When I finished, she wiped her hands on a towel and said, "Oh, honey, you probably just saw a big old black bear. Their faces can look a little funny sometimes, especially if you're scared." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It stood up. It had a face like a person. It was probably just standing on its hind legs to get a better look," she said, her tone final. "You two got yourselves all worked up over nothing. Now go get cleaned up. You're tracking mud everywhere." That was it. That was the end of it for her. A bear. Case closed. But I knew in my gut, in my bones, in the part of me that had frozen solid under that thing's gaze, that it was no bear. A bear has a bear's face. This didn't. It was something else. We never went back to finish the trout pool. I never went back into those woods alone again. For years after that, even as a teenager, I wouldn't step foot into any deep woods without a knife in my pocket, or later, when I was old enough, without a gun. It wasn't a rational fear. It was a deep, primal instinct that had been carved into me that day. The memory of it never faded. It's not like a normal childhood memory that gets fuzzy around the edges. This one is sharp and clear. I can still feel the cold mud on my knees. I can still hear the absolute silence. I can still see the way the light fell on that dark, leathery skin of its face, and the way those deep-set eyes just held mine, not with malice, but with a simple, terrifying awareness. It was just there and then it was gone. And I've never been able to explain it, not to my mom, not to my cousin, not to anyone, not really. All I know is that I saw it, and for one long silent moment, it saw me too. Story 13. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of my friend. And even then, we don't talk about it much because it just freaks us out too much. But I've been reading some stuff online lately, and I figured maybe writing it down will help me process it or something. I don't know. This happened back in the summer of 2004, and I was in my early 20s then, just out of school and kind of drifting, you know? My friend and I, we've known each other since we were kids. We got this idea to cultivate a remote marijuana patch in Halliburton Forest up in Ontario. It was supposed to be easy money, or at least that's what we thought. We'd been scouting the area for a couple of weeks, but this one day, it all went sideways in a way I still can't wrap my head around. That morning started like any other. We woke up early, around 6 o'clock, because we wanted to get as much done as possible before the heat of the day kicked in. The air was cool and damp, with that earthy smell you only get in deep woods, mixed with the scent of pine and decay. I remember pulling on my old jeans and a t-shirt that was already stained with dirt and lacing up my boots. They were heavy, caked with mud from previous trips. My friend was quiet, just sipping coffee from a thermos, and we loaded up the truck with our gear. Shovels, a machete for clearing brush, bags of soil amendments, and the young plants we were going to transplant. We had my pit bull with us, a loyal dog named Duke who loved being outdoors. He was panting excitedly in the back seat, like he knew we were heading somewhere wild. The drive to the forest was uneventful, just winding roads and thick trees closing in around us. We parked at a spot we'd used before, about a mile from where we were working, because we didn't want to draw attention. From there, we had to hike in, carrying everything on our backs. The undergrowth was insane. Thick brambles and thorny bushes that snagged on our clothes and skin. I was using the machete to hack through it, swinging it in wide arcs, and the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling was loud in the quiet morning. Duke bounded ahead, his tail wagging, but he'd stop every now and then to sniff at something, his ears perked up like he was on high alert. We'd been at it for maybe an hour when we stumbled into something we'd never seen before. I was cutting through a particularly dense patch of brambles, sweat dripping down my forehead, when my machete hit something hard. At first, I thought it was a rock or a fallen log, but when I pushed the foliage aside, I saw it was an opening, a tunnel, but not like any animal burrow I'd ever seen. This thing was perfectly carved, almost circular, and wide enough that I could have crouched and walked into it if I'd wanted to. The edges were smooth, like they'd been worn down over time, and it disappeared into the darkness. My friend came over, and we just stared at it for a minute. He muttered, "What the hell is this?" But neither of us had an answer. Curiosity got the better of us, so we decided to check it out. We left our gear piled up nearby and ducked into the tunnel. It was cooler inside, and the air felt heavy, with a weird musky smell that made my nose itch. The walls were packed earth, but they had these grooves in them. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns, like something had been digging or shaping them systematically. We used our flashlights to see, and the beams cut through the gloom, revealing that the tunnel branched off in multiple directions. It was like a network, a whole underground highway, and it felt ancient and purposeful. My heart was starting to beat faster, not from exertion, but from this creeping sense that we weren't supposed to be here. Duke was whining softly, staying close to my legs, which was unusual for him. He's normally fearless. We followed one of the tunnels for what felt like a long time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. Then, suddenly, it opened up into this massive crater clearing. I mean, it was huge, like the size of a football field, and the ground was bare except for a layer of dead leaves and, well, bones. Thousands of them, scattered everywhere. Deer bones, moose bones, even what looked like bear skulls, all piled up or half buried. The sight made my stomach clench. I've seen animal remains before, but this was different. It was organized in a way, like a dumping ground. and the bones had these strange grooves on them, deep cuts that didn't look like teeth marks from wolves or anything natural. They were too precise, almost like they'd been scraped with tools. My friend grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "This is a feeding ground," he whispered, and his voice was shaky. I felt a cold dread wash over me. We both knew we'd stumbled into something we shouldn't have. The air was dead silent. No birds chirping, no wind, just this oppressive stillness. Duke was growling low in his throat, his hackles raised, and he kept looking back toward the tunnel like he expected something to come out. We didn't say much after that. We just turned around and hurried back the way we came, our footsteps echoing in the tunnels. Every shadow seemed to move, and I kept imagining things lurking in the side passages. By the time we got back to our gear, I was breathing hard and my hands were trembling. We decided to get out of there and focus on planting elsewhere, so we packed up and moved to a spot nearer to the local airport. It was a bit more open, with thinner trees, and we thought it might feel safer. The sun was higher now, casting dappled light through the canopy, but the memory of that bone pit was stuck in my head. We started digging holes for the plants, working in silence, both of us on edge. Duke was calmer here, sniffing around but not as agitated. I remember the soil was soft and easy to work with, and for a little while I almost forgot about the tunnels. Then, around midday, we heard the roar of a low-flying plane. It was loud, much louder than usual, like it was right overhead. We looked up and sure enough a small aircraft was buzzing low, probably coming in for a landing at the airport. The sound was deafening, and it must have spooked something in the woods because, out of nowhere, two enormous black creatures burst from the trees about 50 yards away. I swear, I've never seen anything like it. They were on all fours, but they were massive. Each one was nearly as tall as me when I'm standing up, and I'm 6 feet tall. Their fur was jet black and matted, and they moved with this incredible speed, charging through the underbrush like it was nothing. My first thought was bears, but they didn't move like any bear I've ever seen. Bears are bulky and kind of clumsy, but these things were sleek and powerful, their limbs propelling them forward in smooth, fluid motions, and they were silent. No grunts, no snarls, just the sound of their bodies crashing through the vegetation. Duke went nuts. He took off after them, barking furiously, and for a second I was frozen, just watching this unfold. My friend screamed, "What the fuck are those?" And that snapped me out of it. We both started yelling and banging our shovels together, making as much noise as we could. The sound of metal clanging echoed through the woods, and I think it confused the creatures because they veered off, still moving fast. But now they were angling away from us. Duke was chasing them, but he couldn't keep up. They were too quick. I shouted for him to come back, my voice cracking with panic. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my legs felt like jelly. We grabbed our stuff and ran, not looking back, just crashing through the trees toward the truck. The whole way I kept expecting those things to come after us. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, and I could hear my own ragged breathing mixing with my friends'. When we finally reached the truck, we threw everything in the back, including Duke, who was panting and whining. We didn't even bother securing the load. We just jumped in and peeled out, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We never went back to that area, not to get our gear, not to check on the plants, nothing. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, imagining those black shapes moving through the forest or that bone-filled crater. My friend and I talked about it a few times, but we always ended up agreeing that whatever those creatures were, they weren't natural. The tunnels, the bones with those grooves, the way they moved, it all pointed to something predatory, something that had been hunting in that forest for a long time. And the thought that they might have been stalking us, using those hidden highways to get around, still gives me chills. To this day, I don't have any answers. I've read about Bigfoot sightings and other weird stuff, but I don't know what we saw. All I know is that it was real, and it scared the hell out of me. Sometimes when I'm in the woods now, I get this uneasy feeling like I'm being followed and I have to force myself to keep moving. I guess some things are better left alone, but that day in Halliburton Forest, it stuck with me and I doubt I'll ever forget it. Story 14. It was a Tuesday, I think, because I remember I'd spent the day splitting firewood and was dead tired. I'd gone to bed around 10, but around 2 in the morning I woke up needing to pee. My dog, a big German shepherd named Rex, yeah, I know, not the most original name, but he's a good boy, was sleeping at the foot of my bed like always. He usually perks up if I move, but that night he was out cold, so I just shuffled to the bathroom without turning on any lights. The moon was pretty bright, so I could see enough to not trip over anything. The bathroom in my cabin is small, just a toilet and a sink, with a window that looks out into the backyard. I was standing there, half asleep, doing my business, when Rex padded in and sat by the door, watching me. He does that sometimes, like he's keeping guard. Everything was quiet, just the usual rustle of leaves outside and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, out of nowhere, this sound ripped through the silence. It started as this deep, wailing noise that built up fast, like an air raid siren you hear in old war movies. But it wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, if that makes sense, like it was coming from a living thing. It lasted for what felt like forever. But later I timed it in my head and it was about 4 seconds long. My heart just seized up. I froze midstream and I could feel the hair on my arm stand straight up. Rex went rigid too, his ears pinned back, and he let out this low growl that was more vibration than sound. Before I could even process it, the siren sound cut off, and immediately after there were 3 loud whoops. Not like a monkey or anything I'd ever heard. They were deep, guttural, and spaced out evenly, each one hitting me like a physical blow. The volume was insane. It was so loud that my ears rang afterward, and I swear I could feel it in my chest, like when you're too close to a speaker at a concert. Rex didn't bark or move. He just stared at the window, his body tense, like he was ready to bolt or attack, but he didn't make a sound. That was the weirdest part. Normally, if he hears something outside, he'll bark his head off, but this time, he was dead silent, just fixated. For a good 10 minutes after that, there was nothing. Complete silence. Not even the owls or the wind. It was like the whole forest had shut down. I was still standing there in the bathroom, my pants around my ankles, too scared to move. My mind was racing. What the hell was that? I've lived here for 5 years, and I've never heard anything like it. I thought maybe it was some kind of prank or a weird animal, but it didn't fit. The sound was too big, too controlled. Rex hadn't moved an inch. He was still staring out the window, his eyes wide, and his tail was tucked between his legs. I slowly pulled up my pants, my hands shaking so bad I could barely button them. I kept expecting to hear something else, but it was just quiet, eerily quiet. I crept over to the window and peeked out, but it was too dark to see much. The moon was behind clouds now, so the backyard was just a blur of shadows. That's when I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there all night. I have a heavy-duty flashlight on my nightstand, one of those big ones that can light up a whole field. I tiptoed back to the bedroom, Rex following me, but staying close, his body low to the ground. I grabbed the flashlight, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I thought about calling someone, but my phone was in the other room, and I didn't want to make noise. I went back to the bathroom, because the window there faces the direction the sound came from. Based on the volume, I guessed it was about 70 feet away, near the edge of the tree line. I pointed the flashlight out the window and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the grass and into the woods. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, ferns, the usual stuff. But then I noticed Rex was still frozen, staring at one spot. I aimed the light there, and that's when I saw it. Nothing, no movement, no eyes reflecting back, just darkness. But Rex was acting like there was something there, and it creeped me out big time. I kept the light on for a few minutes, scanning back and forth. My hands were sweaty, and the flashlight felt slippery. I was breathing too fast, and I had to force myself to slow down. Part of me wanted to go outside and check, but there was no way I was doing that. Not with Rex acting like that. He's a brave dog. He's chased off bears before, but now he was just passive. It was like he was in a trance. After a while, I turned off the flashlight and just stood there listening. Still nothing. The silence was almost worse than the sound because it felt like something was waiting. I decided to wait it out too. I sat down on the bathroom floor, leaning against the wall, and Rex curled up next to me, but he didn't relax. His ears were still perked, and he'd let out a soft whine every now and then. I must have sat there for over an hour, just staring into the dark, my mind going in circles. I thought about all the Bigfoot stories I'd heard online. I've always been a skeptic. I mean, I love the idea, but I never really believed it. But that sound, it matched recordings I'd heard on YouTube. Ones people claim are Sasquatch calls, the air raid siren thing, followed by whoops. It's a common pattern in those videos. And the volume was identical. It wasn't some distant noise. It was right there, close enough to vibrate the windows. As the sky started to lighten with dawn, I felt a little braver. I got up, my legs stiff from sitting, and decided to check outside. Rex followed me, but he was hesitant, staying by the door as I unlocked it. The air was cool and damp. It had rained earlier that day, so the ground was soft and muddy. I stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking under my feet, and looked toward where the sound had come from. That's when I saw them, footprints, big ones. They started about 70 feet from the house, right where I'd guessed the noise originated. I walked over, my heart in my throat, and knelt down to look. They were huge. I later measured them, and they were 13 inches long and about 6 inches wide. The impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and the shape was human-like but broader, with no clear toe marks because the mud had filled in a bit. They led off into the woods, but after a few yards they disappeared into the undergrowth. I just stood there staring at those prints. My skepticism was fighting with pure fear. I kept telling myself it could be a bear. Bears can leave big prints, but these didn't look like any bear tracks I'd seen. They were too symmetrical, too purposeful, and bears don't make sounds like what I heard. Rex sniffed at them, but didn't seem interested. He just looked back at the house like he wanted to go inside. I took some photos with my phone, but they came out blurry because my hands were still shaking. I thought about calling the sheriff or something, but what would I say? Hey, I heard a weird noise and found big footprints. They'd think I was crazy. So I didn't do anything. I just went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with Rex, trying to calm down. The rest of the day, I was on edge. Every little noise made me jump. I kept going over it in my head. The sound, the silence, Rex's reaction, the footprints, it all fit together in a way that scared the hell out of me. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and I know the animals here, but this was different. It felt intelligent, like whatever it was knew I was there. Since then, I've had a few more weird nights, odd knocks on the walls, things moving in the yard, but nothing as intense as that one night. I still don't know what it was. Part of me wants to believe it was a Bigfoot, but the rational part says it could be something else, maybe a person messing with me. But who would be out in the middle of the night, making sounds like that? And why would Rex act so strange? I'm sharing this because I need to get it out, and maybe someone else has heard something similar. I've listened to those online recordings over and over, and it's a perfect match, but I'll never know for sure. All I have is the memory of that sound, the image of those footprints, and this gut feeling that I wasn't alone out there. And that's enough to keep me up at night, wondering what's really in these woods. Story 15. It was supposed to be a normal camping trip, just me, my dad, and my two brothers. We'd gone up near Camp Denton in Missouri, a spot my dad had been going to since he was a kid. It was the second day, a Saturday, late afternoon, maybe around 5 o'clock. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long, skinny shadows across our campsite. We were all in a good mood. We'd spent the day fishing, not catching much, but it didn't matter. The air was warm, but that nice, comfortable warm you get in the early fall, not the sticky heat of summer. I was the one cooking dinner. We had this old blackened frying pan we only ever brought camping. I laid out strips of bacon in it, the sound of them sizzling over the fire, the only real noise for a while. Then I cracked a dozen eggs right into the bacon grease. The smell was incredible, you know, that smoky, salty, greasy smell that just smells like being outdoors. We were all laughing. My older brother was teasing my dad about his terrible fishing luck, and my younger brother was trying to skip rocks into the fire pit. We were loud. I realize that now. We weren't whispering or anything. We were just a family making a bunch of happy noise in the middle of the woods. We ate straight out of the pan, using paper plates that were getting soggy from the grease. It was one of those perfect moments. The sky was turning this deep orange and purple, and the fire was crackling, and for a little while, everything just felt right. After we ate, we just stayed around the fire, poking at the embers with sticks, not really talking much anymore, just watching the flames. That's when the first sound happened. It wasn't a loud sound, it was a soft crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. But it wasn't the little snap of a squirrel or a rabbit. This was heavier. We all heard it. My dad looked up from the fire, his head tilted. "Probably a deer," he said, his voice low. We all nodded, but nobody really relaxed. We just sat there listening. The woods at night get so quiet. It's like a blanket gets thrown over everything. You notice every little sound, and then we heard it again. Another crack and then a rustle, like something big was pushing its way through the underbrush. It wasn't a graceful sound, it was clumsy, like whatever it was didn't care about being quiet. My older brother, he grabbed his flashlight, one of those big maglite ones that feels like a club. He clicked it on and shone it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, lighting up the trunks and leaves. But it's a flashlight, you know. It only shows you a little tunnel of what's there. Everything outside that circle is just pitch black. He swept the light back and forth. We didn't see any eyes reflecting back. We didn't see anything at all, but we could still hear it. The rustling stopped for a second, and then we heard it move. And this is the part that still makes my skin feel cold. It didn't sound like it was running on 4 legs. It sounded like it was running on 2. You know how a deer runs? It's a gallop, a rhythm of 4 beats. A bear lumbers, it's a heavy rolling sort of sound. This was different. It was a steady, heavy thump, thump, thump of 2 feet, hitting the ground one after the other, and it was fast. It sounded huge. The sound moved away from us, crashing through the brush, and then it was gone. The woods went silent again. We all just looked at each other. My dad's face was serious. He didn't say deer this time. My younger brother, his eyes were wide, and he'd moved closer to my dad. The comfortable feeling from dinner was completely gone. It was like a switch had been flipped. We were all on edge. "Let's get in the truck," my dad said, his voice quiet but firm. We didn't argue. We all piled into his old Ford pickup. It was cramped with the 4 of us in the cab, but nobody wanted to be outside. My dad started the engine, and we drove slowly down the dirt road that wound through the campground. We knew there was another campsite about a half-mile away, one that had been empty when we arrived. He pulled in there, turned off the headlights, and killed the engine. The silence in the truck was heavy. We were all just listening, holding our breath. The windows were down a crack. At first, all we could hear was the ticking sound of the engine cooling down. Then, from the woods right next to this other empty campsite, we heard it, a shuffling sound, like something big was just pacing, just walking back and forth, slowly, through the dry leaves. My dad shined his flashlight out the window, but again, we saw nothing. The beam just showed empty forest. The shuffling stopped the second the light hit the trees. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, not saying a word. The shuffling didn't come back. My dad let out a long breath. "Probably just a bear messing with us," he said. He was trying to sound confident, but I could hear the tightness in his voice. He was scared too. We all were. But what else were we supposed to do? We couldn't just sit in the truck all night. So he started the engine again, and we drove back to our own camp. The fire had died down to just glowing coals. We built it back up, throwing on more wood until the flames were leaping high again. The light made us feel a little better, but it also created a wall of darkness around us, you know? You can only see what the firelight touches, and everything beyond that feels 10 times darker. We tried to act normal. We sat back down on the logs we'd dragged around the fire pit, but we weren't laughing or talking anymore. We were just sitting there, staring into the flames, listening. For about 45 minutes, nothing happened. I started to think maybe my dad was right. Maybe it was just a bear, and it had wandered off. The normal night sounds started to come back. The crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt my shoulders start to unwind a little, and then the walking started again. This time, it was closer, a lot closer. It was just on the other side of the ring of darkness, right at the edge where the firelight faded into black. It wasn't running, it was walking, a slow, deliberate, heavy crunching sound with every step. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. It was walking a slow circle around our camp, just outside the light. My dad stood up so fast, his log stool almost tipped over. He grabbed his flashlight and his rifle from where it was leaning against a tree. He didn't point the rifle, just held it ready, the barrel pointing at the ground. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice booming in the quiet. "Get out of here!" The walking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a listening silence. It felt like whatever was out there had stopped to listen to him, to us. We were all standing now, huddled together near the fire. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could smell the pine smoke from the fire and my own sweat. My dad swept the flashlight beam in a wide arc. The circle of light slid over trees, ferns, rocks, and then it stopped. It didn't stop on a shape, it stopped on a space. There was a gap between two thick pine trees, and in that gap, the beam of light just disappeared. It was like there was a wall of solid blackness there, something so dark it just swallowed the light whole. It was taller than a man, much taller. And then the smell hit us. It's a smell I'll never forget. I've tried to describe it to people since, and the best I can come up with is a dead animal that's been left in the sun, mixed with the worst body odor you can imagine. And underneath it all, a weird, wet dog kind of smell. It was overwhelming. It made my eyes water and my stomach turn. My younger brother gagged. From that same spot, that wall of blackness, we heard a low sound. It wasn't a growl, not like a dog or a bear. It was deeper than that. It was a rumble, so low you could feel it in your chest more than you could hear it with your ears. It was a vibration in the air. It was a sound that didn't belong to anything I'd ever heard before. Not on TV, not in a zoo, nowhere. That's when the real, pure terror set in. This wasn't a curious deer or a scavenging bear. This was something else, something that knew we were there, something that was letting us know it was there. My dad didn't say another word. He just looked at us, and his face was pale in the firelight. He didn't have to say it. We all knew. We were not sleeping in that tent. We were not staying another minute. We moved fast. There was no discussion. We started packing. We didn't fold the tent. We just yanked the stakes out of the ground and stuffed the whole thing, still half assembled, into the back of the truck. We threw the cooler in, the sleeping bags, everything. We weren't trying to be quiet anymore. We were making as much noise as we could, banging things around, hoping it would scare whatever it was away. The whole time, we could feel it watching us. We couldn't see it, but we knew it was still there, just beyond the light. That terrible smell would come and go in waves. I was grabbing the frying pan, the one we'd cooked the bacon in, and my hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped it. That's when I noticed something, the trees right at the edge of the clearing, where we'd seen the blackness. The leaves on the lower branches were moving, but there was no wind, none at all. The air was completely still. The leaves were shaking because something big was brushing against them. My dad saw it too. In the truck. "Now," he said, his voice a tight whisper. We scrambled into the cab. My dad jumped in, slammed the door and turned the key. The engine roared to life. He flipped on the headlights and the high beams, and for a split second, the woods in front of us were lit up like daylight, and we saw it. Not all of it, not a clear shape. It was just a massive dark silhouette as it moved. It was turning away from us, pushing between two trees to get back into the deeper woods. It was huge. I mean, it made my dad, who's 6 feet tall, look like a child. It was broad, covered in dark hair, and it moved on two legs with a powerful, fluid motion that was nothing like a man's walk. It was gone in a second, vanishing into the trees, but the image is burned into my brain. My dad threw the truck into reverse, spun us around on the dirt, and then we were flying down that bumpy road, the truck bouncing and swerving. Nobody spoke, we just held on. I looked back out the rear window, but there was nothing there except the darkness we were leaving behind. We drove all the way home that night, 4 hours in the dark, nobody saying a word. We were all just lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the sun was starting to come up. The normalcy of our street with its trimmed lawns and porch lights felt alien. We never went back to that campsite. My dad sold his camping gear a few months later. We don't really talk about it much, even now. When we do, we just call it that thing in the woods. It wasn't a bear. I've spent years reading about bears, about cougars, about every large animal in North America. Nothing fits. Nothing explains the smell, the two-legged run, the way it swallowed the light, or that low chest rumbling sound. I still go camping sometimes, but I never go deep into the woods anymore. I stick to crowded, well-lit campgrounds, and I never ever cook bacon. The smell of it frying on a campfire doesn't bring back happy memories anymore. It just brings back that night, the feeling of being watched by something I can't explain, and the chilling certainty that we were not alone out there, and that whatever was with us had no fear of us at all. Story 16. It was still dark when we got there. The kind of dark that feels heavy, like a blanket you can't shake off. My dad, Ed, he'd been waking me up for deer season since I was old enough to hold a rifle, and this year was no different. We were in Coshocton County, Ohio. The gun season had just opened, and the air had that late autumn bite to it, the kind that makes your nose sting and your fingers ache inside your gloves, even before the sun even thinks about coming up. We were heading to our spot, this steep hill covered in a mix of oaks and pines. It was a place we knew well, or at least we thought we did. We'd hunted it for years. We didn't talk much on the walk in. You don't really. It's all about being quiet, listening, letting the woods wake up around you. The only sounds were our boots crunching on the frozen leaves and our breath pluming out in little white ghosts in the beam of our headlamps. We split up at the base of the hill, like we always did. He went to the left to an old fallen log he liked to use as a blind. I went to the right, climbing up to a rocky outcrop that gave me a good view of a creek bed below. It was our routine. We'd sit there motionless for what felt like hours, waiting for the grey light of dawn to start filtering through the trees. That's when the deer move. I remember settling in against a big pine tree, the bark rough through my jacket. I propped my rifle on my knee, clicked the safety on, and just tried to breathe slow. The cold was seeping into my bones, a deep, dull chill. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. It's always like that at the start. All anticipation and nerves. You're just a part of the woods then, another animal waiting for the sun. That's when I heard the geese. It was a sound I knew, but it felt different that morning. It started as a distant honking chatter, and then it got louder, right overhead. A huge flock of them, their wings making a rhythmic whooshing sound that seemed to fill the whole sky. I craned my neck back, but in the pre-dawn gloom and with the thick canopy, I couldn't see them, just heard them. Their squawks and calls were chaotic and loud, a familiar noise that for some reason this time made the back of my neck prickle. It was like they were upset, really booking it out of there. The sound faded as they moved off, the honks getting softer and softer until they were just a memory in the air. And then the silence came back, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Before, it was a waiting silence, a peaceful one. This was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that feels like it's pressing in on your eardrums. It was so quiet, I could hear the blood pulsing in my head. I remember shifting my weight slightly, the crinkle of my jacket sounding like a thunderclap in that stillness. I gripped my rifle a little tighter. Something felt off. My skin was crawling, like I was being watched. I told myself it was just pre-hunt jitters, that I was being stupid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then the scream happened. It erupted from the other side of the hill, from where my dad was supposed to be. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't a bear's roar or a coyote's yelp. I've heard those. This was something else entirely. It was this raw, guttural, hair-raising shriek that seemed to tear right through the fabric of the woods. It was so loud, so full of pure, undiluted rage and power that it felt physical, like a punch to the chest. It didn't just start and stop, it seemed to hang in the air, vibrating, shaking the very trees. Every hair on my body stood straight up. My heart didn't just beat faster. It felt like it seized in my chest, a cold, hard knot of pure terror. Before the echo of the scream had even died away, the crashing started. It was the sound of large branches breaking, but not like a tree falling. This was different. It was a continuous, violent, smashing sound. Crack, snap, crunch. It wasn't random. It was moving. It sounded like a bulldozer, a legit bulldozer, was plowing through the dense woods on the opposite slope. I could hear trees groaning, the sharp snap of limbs as thick as my arm, the crunch of undergrowth being utterly demolished. It was headed down the hill, away from me, but the sheer force of it, the power you could feel in that sound, was absolutely petrifying. My body went on autopilot, my thumb found the safety on my rifle, and I clicked it off. The metallic snick was a tiny, insignificant sound against that backdrop of destruction. I was trembling so bad, I was worried I'd dropped the gun. I raised it, pointing it in the general direction of the noise, but my hands were shaking so violently, I knew I couldn't have hit a barn door from 10 feet away. I was frozen there, crouched against my tree, just listening to this thing tear its way down through the forest. I wasn't even breathing. I realized I was holding my breath, my lungs burning, and then it screamed again. This second scream was farther away, down the hill, but it was just as terrifying. It was a long, wailing roar that tapered off into this horrible, gurgling growl. It was the most unearthly sound I have ever heard in my life. It didn't belong in those woods. It didn't belong on this planet. It was a sound of pure, ancient wildness, something that should have been extinct 1,000,000 years ago. Then, as suddenly as it started, the crashing stopped. The scream faded, and the heavy, pressing silence returned. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in a half-crouch, my rifle pointed at nothing, my ears straining for any sound. It could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 20. Time just stopped making sense. My mind was racing, trying to put a name to what I'd just heard, what I'd just felt. A moose in Ohio. No, a bear. I've been close to a black bear before. They can make noise, but nothing with that volume, that raw power. And the crashing, a bear doesn't move through the woods like a wrecking ball. This was something bigger, something that didn't care what was in its way. The first thing that broke the spell was the faint grey light of dawn, finally starting to filter through the trees. The world began to take on shape and color again. I could see the details of the bark on the tree in front of me, the frost on the fallen leaves. The normalcy of it was almost sickening. I heard a cautious, low whistle from my left. It was my dad's signal. I whistled back, my lips so numb with cold and fear, I could barely pucker them. We started moving towards each other, meeting in the saddle of the hill where we'd split up. I was still shaking, my knees feeling like jelly. When I saw his face, I knew he'd heard it too. All the color was drained from his cheeks. He looked old, older than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were wide, darting around, not settling on anything. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice a rough, quiet whisper. He wasn't looking at me. He was scanning the tree line behind me. "Yeah," I managed to get out. My own voice sounded thin and reedy. "What the hell was that, Dad?" He just shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. He finally looked at me, and I saw the same confusion and primal fear that was coursing through me. "I don't know, son. I honest to God don't know." We stood there for a few minutes, not saying anything else, just listening. The woods were waking up now for real. A squirrel chattered somewhere. A few birds started tentatively singing. It was all so normal, so everyday. It made what had happened just minutes before feel like a shared nightmare. "We should go look," I said, not really wanting to, but feeling like we had to. He shook his head again, more firmly this time. "No, we're not going over there." His tone left no room for argument. It was the voice he used when he was truly, deeply scared and trying not to show it. "Let's just get back to the truck." We didn't talk on the walk back. The hike out felt 10 times longer than the hike in. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves, made us both flinch and stop, our heads whipping around, our hands gripping our rifles. We were 2 grown men, armed with high-powered rifles, and we were scared to our cores. We were jumping at shadows. The woods, our woods, a place I'd known since I was a kid, had suddenly become alien and hostile. When we broke through the tree line and saw the old Ford pickup sitting in the pull-off, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. We practically ran the last 50 yards. We threw our gear in the back, climbed in, and my dad started the engine almost before his door was closed. He didn't even take off his hunting vest or his orange hat. He just put the truck in drive and got us back on the gravel road, driving faster than he usually would. We rode in silence for a good 10 minutes, the heater blasting, before he finally spoke. "Sounded like it was coming from the old Johnson Hollow," he said, staring straight ahead at the winding road. "Yeah," I said. "Nothing should make a noise like that," he said, almost to himself. "We never went back to that hill. Not that season, not any season after. We found other places to hunt, but it was never the same. The fun was gone, replaced by this low-level hum of anxiety every time I'm in the woods before dawn. That specific gut-chilling terror has faded into a general, lasting fear of the unknown. It's the not knowing that gets you, that eats at you. What was it? A twisted, mangled bear. Some kind of animal in agony we'd never heard of? My mind goes to other places, the stories you hear whispered around campfires, the things people laugh off as nonsense, but I know what I heard. I know the feeling of that scream vibrating in my teeth. I know the sound of trees being smashed like they were matchsticks. I know the look on my dad's face, a look I'd only ever seen a handful of times in my life, a look of pure, unadulterated fear. We were in those woods, just the 2 of us, and something else was in there with us. Something big, something powerful, and something that let out a scream that didn't belong to any animal I've ever known, and we never saw it. We just heard it, and that was enough. It was more than enough. To this day, when I hear geese flying overhead, that specific frantic honking, my blood runs cold, and for a split second I'm right back on that hillside in the dark, waiting for the silence to break, and knowing, with a certainty that still haunts me, that it will. Story 17. All right, I'll just get this out. I've been sitting on it for years, and I guess typing it here is better than it just rattling around in my head forever. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't really care anymore. I just need to say it. My husband and I, we used to love the backcountry. It was our thing. We'd save up, take a week, and just disappear into the mountains. This time it was a guided horseback trip in Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful, pristine places left in the lower 48. We were so excited. The first couple of days were perfect. Just perfect. Clear skies, the air so clean it felt like you were drinking it, and this huge, overwhelming silence that wasn't really silent at all if you listened. You could hear the wind, the horses, the creek way down in the valley. Our guide was a guy named Rick, a real mountain man. Looked like he was carved from wood and leather. He knew what he was doing, you could tell. He'd been doing these trips for 20 years. Nothing seemed to faze him. It was the third day. I remember the light was different. It was still morning, but the sun had a hard, brittle quality to it, like it was shining through old glass. We were riding single file along this trail that skirted a dense patch of pine forest on our left. To our right was a steep drop-off down to a river, just a silver thread from where we were. The trail was maybe 4 feet wide, just enough for the horses. My horse was a big, gentle gelding named Gus. He'd been solid as a rock the whole trip, but that morning he was off. His ears were flicking back and forth constantly, not the lazy swatting at flies, but this sharp, nervous twitching. He'd let out these little huffing breaths, and I could feel the muscles in his neck and shoulders tensing up under the saddle. I remember thinking maybe he'd eaten something bad. I looked ahead at my husband. He was on a smaller, feistier mare, and she was dancing sideways, her hooves skittering on the loose gravel of the trail. He was having to really fight her to keep her in line. Rick, who was leading, kept glancing back, his face a little tighter than usual. "They're spooky today," my husband called out, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet. Rick just grunted. "Something's got 'em twitchy, maybe a bear. Just keep 'em steady." But it didn't feel like a bear. I'd been around bears before, seen what they do. This was different. This was a deep, primal kind of nervousness. The horses weren't just scared, they were dreadful. It was like they knew something we didn't, something their ancient brains were screaming at them about. Then the smell hit me. It's hard to describe, but I'll never forget it. It was the worst thing I've ever smelled in my life, and I grew up on a farm. It wasn't just rot, though that was part of it. It was like rotten meat mixed with old wet fur, and underneath it all, this sharp, coppery, metallic stench, like blood and sickness. It was so thick, it felt like I was breathing soup. I gagged and pulled the collar of my shirt up over my nose. It didn't help. The smell was everywhere. "Jesus, what is that?" my husband said, his voice muffled by his own jacket. Rick had stopped his horse completely. He was sitting bolt upright, staring into the wall of trees to our left. His hand went slowly to the rifle scabbard on his saddle. He didn't pull it out, but his fingers were resting on the strap. That's when my stomach just dropped into my boots. If Rick was that worried, we were in trouble. The forest was dead quiet. A minute before, you could hear birds, the scuttling of squirrels, the whole normal orchestra of the woods. Now it was just gone. Vacant. The only sound was the nervous stamping and blowing of the horses and the wind whistling over the ridge above us. Gus started to back up, his haunches pressing against the rock face on the uphill side of the trail. He was trying to get away from the trees, from the smell. I was pulling on the reins, talking to him, trying to keep him calm, but it was like he couldn't even hear me. His eyes were wide, showing the whites all around. I could feel his heart hammering between my legs. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a slow reveal. It didn't step out. It lunged. 1 second there was just the dark, tangled line of the forest edge. The next, this thing was just there, bursting out of the shadows between two big pines. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was too wrong. It was tall, maybe 7.5, 8 feet, but it was so thin, emaciated. Its arms were long and wiry, hanging down past its knees, and its legs looked too spindly to hold it up. But it moved with this terrifying, jerky speed. Its fur, or what was left of it, was a patchy, filthy grey-brown. There were huge bare patches of raw, pinkish skin, covered in what looked like sores or scabs. It was sick. You could see that immediately. It was a sick, dying thing. But its eyes, oh God, its eyes. They weren't dark or animal-like. They were this pale, sickly yellow, like old pus, and they seemed to glow with their own foul light. They weren't looking around. They were locked right on us with this flat, hungry hatred. It let out a sound, this snarling, guttural cough that was half roar, half retch. The sound was wet, like there was something broken in its chest. Everything after that happened in a blur, but every frame is burned into my memory with perfect, horrible clarity. The creature took two loping, unbalanced strides towards us. It was heading for Rick's horse at the front. Rick was fumbling with the rifle strap, his movements frantic, but he was too slow. The thing swung one of those long, bony arms. Its hand was huge, and the fingers ended in thick, dark claws. It wasn't trying to grab the horse. It was trying to hurt it. Its claws raked across the hindquarter of Rick's horse. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was enough. The horse screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure terror that I'd never heard from an animal before, and reared up. Rick, caught by surprise, was thrown clean out of the saddle. He hit the ground hard on the edge of the trail, his head bouncing off a rock. He went still. My husband's mare went berserk. She spun around, lost her footing on the loose gravel, and for one heart-stopping second I thought she was going to go over the edge and take my husband with her. He was hauling on the reins, shouting, his face a mask of pure panic. My own horse, Gus, decided he'd had enough. He spun away from the thing, away from the cliff, and just bolted. He didn't care about the trail. He just ran straight back the way we'd come, crashing through the underbrush on the uphill side. I lost my stirrups and just clung on, wrapping my hands in his mane, pressing my body low against his neck. Branches whipped at my face and arms, tearing at my clothes. I could hear the thing behind us, that horrible wet snarling and the crashing sounds of my husband and his horse following us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could see was the blur of trees, and all I could feel was the violent, jarring motion of the horse beneath me, and the sheer, mind-numbing terror. It was a cold, physical thing, this fear. It felt like ice water had been poured into my veins. My heart was beating so fast and so hard, I thought it would just burst. My lungs couldn't get enough air. I was gasping, sobbing, but no sound was coming out. I have no idea how long we ran. It felt like an eternity. Gus was running on pure instinct, his fear overriding any sense of self-preservation. He was stumbling, crashing through deadfall, his sides heaving. I was certain we were going to fall, that he would break a leg and I'd be left there, alone, for that thing to find. Then suddenly, we broke out of the thicker trees and onto the main trail we'd used the day before. Gus didn't slow down. He just kept running, his hooves pounding on the dirt. I risked a glance over my shoulder. My husband was right behind me, his face pale and streaked with dirt, his knuckles white on the reins. His horse was lathered in sweat, its mouth foaming. We didn't stop. We didn't speak. We just rode, our bodies moving in a frantic, jarring rhythm with the horse's panicked gallop. The only thought in my head was a single repeating word: go, 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 go. Somehow, we found our way back to the base camp. It was just a clearing with a fire pit and a couple of supply tents. The other guides and a few other clients were there, and they must have seen the sheer terror on our faces because they came running. We fell off the horses, my legs just gave out, and I collapsed onto the ground, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I was crying and gasping at the same time. My husband staggered over to me and pulled me into a hug, and I could feel him shaking just as hard. "Rick," he finally choked out, looking at the other guides. Back on the trail. He fell. That thing. Two of the guides immediately saddled up fresh horses and took off back the way we'd come, rifles in hand. The rest of us just sat there in a state of shock. Someone handed me a bottle of water, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold it. It was maybe an hour later when the guides came back. They had Rick with them. He was conscious, but he had a nasty gash on his forehead and he was concussed, his speech slurred. They'd found his horse a little way down the trail, trembling but unharmed aside from the scratch marks. They said they hadn't seen or heard anything else. The woods were quiet again. We packed up camp that afternoon. Nobody argued. Nobody said a word about cutting the trip short. We just moved mechanically, packing our gear, loading the mules. The normal sounds of camp, the chatter, the jokes, were completely absent. It was the quietest packing job I've ever been a part of. The ride out the next day was a nightmare of tension. Every shadow in the trees made me jump. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept smelling that smell, even though it was gone. It was like it had been baked into my sinuses. We got back to the ranch, settled the bill with a few terse words, got in our truck and drove. We didn't talk about it for the first 2 hours. We just listened to the tires on the pavement. When we finally did talk, it was in fragments. Did you see its eyes? It was so thin. It was sick. It wanted to hurt us. That was the part that shattered everything for me. All the stories, the myths, the blurry photos. They paint this picture of a shy, gentle giant, a peaceful forest spirit. This thing wasn't peaceful. It wasn't shy. It was desperate. It was violent. It was diseased and starving, and full of a hatred that felt ancient and personal. It looked at us not with curiosity, but with a kind of vile hunger, like we were the source of its misery. I haven't been back to the backcountry since. Not once. My husband has tried to get me to go on a simple car camping trip, and I can't do it. The thought of being that far from a road, of being in the deep, dark woods when the sun goes down, it makes my chest tighten up. I can't. Sometimes at night, I'll wake up from a dead sleep, and for a split second, I'll smell it again. That rotten, coppery stench, and I'll see those glowing yellow eyes, full of nothing but hate, and I remember the sound of its claws on the horse's hide. It wasn't a myth. It was a sick, dying, and terribly real thing, and it's still out there. Story 18. Okay, so this happened to me about 2 years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never really talked about it much because, well, who would believe me? But I found this place online where people share weird stuff, and I figured maybe someone here has had something similar happen. I need to get it off my chest. It was a Tuesday in early October, I remember, because the leaves were just starting to turn, and the air had that crisp feel that makes you want to be outside. My friend, let's call him Jake, though I won't use real names, was supposed to come hiking with me near Redding, California, up by Lake Shasta. We'd planned it for weeks, but the morning of, he texted me saying he'd caught some stomach bug and had to bail. I was already packed and itching to get out, so I decided to go alone. Big mistake in hindsight. I'd done my research, picked a trail that was supposed to be well marked and not too crowded, especially on a weekday. I packed the usual stuff: water, snacks, a first aid kit, my pocket knife, one of those sturdy folding ones I always carry, and a map I'd printed out. No phone service out there, so I made sure I had the route memorized. I left my car at the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The sun was up but not too high, casting long shadows through the trees. The parking lot was empty, except for my beat-up sedan, which should have been my first clue that maybe I was in for a lonely day. The trail started off easy, winding through pine forests with that fresh, earthy smell. I could hear birds chirping and the occasional rustle in the underbrush, probably squirrels or deer. For the first hour or so, everything felt normal. I was enjoying the solitude, just me and nature. But then, slowly, I started to feel this weird sensation, like someone was watching me. You know that feeling you get when you're alone in a room, but you swear there's eyes on you? It was like that, but amplified. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. Being alone in the woods can do that to you. But it didn't go away. It got stronger, like a weight on my shoulders. I kept hiking, trying to focus on the path, but I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often. The woods were dense here, with thick bushes and tall trees that blocked out a lot of the sunlight. It felt darker than it should have been for mid-morning. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft thud to my left. I turned, and there was a small rock, about the size of a golf ball, lying on the ground a few feet away. It hadn't been there before. My heart did this little skip, but I told myself it was probably just an animal or something. Maybe a bird dislodged it. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer, just the wind rustling the leaves. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched intensified. My skin started to crawl, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. Then another rock, this one bigger, like baseball-sized, came flying out of nowhere and landed right in front of me, kicking up dirt. That's when the fear really set in. It wasn't an accident. Someone or something was throwing rocks at me. I froze for a second, my breath catching in my throat. I yelled again, "Who's there? Stop messing around." Still nothing. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. That's when I noticed the footsteps. They were coming from my right, off the trail, matching my pace step for step. When I stopped, they stopped. When I started walking again, they started. It was this eerie synchronization that made my blood run cold. I could hear the crunch of leaves and twigs, like something heavy was moving parallel to me, just out of sight. I gripped my knife in my pocket, my hand sweating so much the handle felt slippery. I didn't pull it out yet, but having it there gave me a tiny bit of comfort. I decided to pick up the pace, heading for an overlook that was marked on my map. It was supposed to be a clearing with a view of the lake, and I thought if I could get there, I might see something or at least feel safer in the open. The trail started to climb, and my legs were burning, but I was too scared to slow down. The footsteps kept pace, always to my right, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. I kept glancing over, but I never saw anything, just shadows and movement in the corner of my eye. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my breathing was shallow, like I couldn't get enough air. When I finally reached the overlook, I felt a rush of relief. It was a small rocky area with a view of Lake Shasta stretching out below, the water sparkling in the sunlight. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, but then I realized I had to go back the same way I came. The trail looped, but according to my map, the quickest route back to the car was retracing my steps through that dense forest. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to go back there, but I had no choice. I spent a few minutes at the overlook, trying to calm down, but the whole time, I felt exposed like I was being watched from the trees. I started back down, and almost immediately the footsteps started again. This time they seemed closer, more deliberate. I was walking faster now, almost jogging, my eyes darting around, trying to spot whatever was out there. The forest felt darker, more menacing. Then I tripped. My foot caught on a root I hadn't seen, and I went down hard, landing on my right knee. Pain shot through me, sharp and immediate. I cried out, and as I did, I heard the footsteps stop. I scrambled to get up, my knee throbbing, and that's when I saw it. About 30 feet away, standing between two tall pines, was this figure. It was tall, way taller than a person, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It was covered in reddish-brown hair, thick and matted, and its face, I'll never forget this, had grayish skin, almost like it was pale or sickly. It was just standing there watching me, not moving, not making a sound, just staring with these dark eyes that seemed to pin me in place. I felt frozen, my body locked up with terror. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't have faces that look almost human. This thing was intelligent. I could feel it in the way it held itself, like it was studying me. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. I didn't breathe, didn't move. Then slowly, I started to push myself up, my knees screaming in protest. As I stood, the thing just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, like it melted into the trees. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and limped away as fast as I could, not looking back. Every step was agony, my knee swelling up, but adrenaline kept me going. I could hear rustling behind me, but no more footsteps, no more rocks. It was like whatever it was had decided to let me go. The rest of the hike back was a blur. I kept expecting it to reappear, to chase me, but nothing happened. I made it to my car somehow, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely unlock the door. I got in, locked it, and just sat there for a long time, breathing heavily, my whole body trembling. I drove away as soon as I could, not stopping until I was back in town. I never went back to that trail, and I never told anyone, except a couple of close friends who just shrugged it off. But I know what I saw, and I know what happened. That large rock landing ahead of me was the moment I knew I wasn't alone, that something was stalking me, something smart enough to toy with me. And that sighting, it's burned into my memory. I still have nightmares about it, about those eyes watching me from the shadows. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But that day changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of how small we are in the grand scheme of things. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched all over again. Story 19. I remember we were hiking along this narrow path that wound through dense pine trees, and I kept getting this prickly sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. At first, I brushed it off as just being jumpy because we were in bear country, and my dad had drilled into us to stay alert, but it didn't go away. My little sister, she's 12. She even whispered to me, "Do you feel that? Like eyes on us?" I nodded, but we didn't say anything to our parents because we didn't want to sound paranoid. My mom was ahead of us, humming some tune, and my dad was leading the way, checking the map every so often. Around midday, we stopped for a break near this small stream. That's when we stumbled into this clearing that just felt off. It wasn't on the map, and it was too perfect, like a circle carved out of the forest. The ground was covered in pine needles, but scattered all over were pieces of old clothing, a faded flannel shirt, what looked like ripped jeans, even a single boot that was all weathered and mossy. It was creepy as hell. My dad picked up the boot and turned it over. It was heavy, like it had been there for years, and the sole was almost worn through. He muttered something about hikers losing gear, but the way everything was just thrown around, it didn't look accidental. It felt like someone had dumped it there, or worse, like it was some kind of marker. We didn't stick around long. My mom said it gave her the creeps, so we packed up and moved on. But that feeling of being watched stuck with me the whole afternoon. By the time we made camp that evening, I was exhausted but still on edge. We set up near a cluster of boulders that offered some shelter from the wind, and my dad got a fire going while my mom and sister started on dinner. The dogs, we had two, a German shepherd named Rex and a mutt named Buddy, were usually pretty chill after a long hike, but they kept pacing around the camp, their ears perked up like they heard something. I figured it was just wildlife, maybe a squirrel or something, but Rex would let out this low growl every now and then, which wasn't like him. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped, and we huddled around the fire. The flames crackled, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the pine scent was comforting at first. We were roasting marshmallows, talking about nothing important, when this foul odor hit us out of nowhere. It was like rotten meat mixed with something musky, like wet dog, but 1,000 times worse. I gagged a little, and my mom covered her nose. "What is that?" she said, her voice tight. The dogs went nuts. Rex started barking like crazy, and Buddy was whining and pulling at his leash, his hackles raised. My dad stood up, his face serious. "Quiet, guys," he said, but you could tell he was worried. Then the sounds started. They came from just beyond the firelight, maybe 30 feet away, where the trees got thick. At first, it was this low, guttural noise that sounded like a strangled goat, but deeper, more primal. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. Not a mountain lion's scream or an elk's bugle. This was raw and violent, like something was being torn apart. The first call made my blood run cold. It rose in intensity, starting low and building to this piercing shriek that echoed through the canyon. I froze, my marshmallow stick hovering over the fire, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. My sister grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in, and she was trembling. The second call came a few seconds later, even louder and closer. It was like whatever it was had moved in, and the sound was so loud it felt like it was vibrating in my bones. Rex was barking non-stop now, lunging toward the darkness, and Buddy was cowering behind my legs. My dad shouted, "Everyone get behind me!" And he reached for the rifle we always carried for protection. He didn't point it, just held it ready, his knuckles white. I could see the fear in his eyes. He's ex-military, not easily spooked, but this had him rattled. The smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Then the third call erupted, and this one was the worst. It was louder than the others, rising to a crescendo that felt like it was right on top of us. It didn't sound animal or human. It was this hybrid of screams and growls that made my skin crawl. I remember thinking, if this thing charges, we're dead. The firelight only reached so far, and beyond that was pitch black, but I could almost sense something massive moving out there. My dad had the gun raised, but he didn't fire. Later, he told me he was afraid that if he shot, it might provoke whatever it was to rush us, and in the dark, we wouldn't stand a chance, so we just stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. The sounds stopped as suddenly as they started. For a few minutes there was silence, except for the crackling fire and our ragged breathing. The foul odor began to fade, slowly at first, then quicker, like it was drifting away on the breeze. The dogs calmed down too. Rex stopped barking and just stood there, panting, while Buddy crept out from behind me and lay down, still shaking. We didn't move for what felt like forever. My mom finally broke the silence, her voice shaky. What was that? No one had an answer. We stayed by the fire for another hour or so, too scared to go to our tents. But nothing else happened. The night felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath, and every little noise made me jump. We eventually went to bed, but I don't think any of us slept much. I kept my flashlight on and listened to every rustle outside, imagining something lurking just beyond the tent flaps. The memory of those vocalizations played over and over in my head, that strangled, guttural noise that didn't belong in this world. The next morning we woke up with the sun, and the first thing we did was investigate the area where the sounds had come from. My dad led the way, rifle in hand, and we followed cautiously. Behind one of the boulders, about where we'd guessed the noise originated, we found this patch of flattened grass. It was weird, not like an animal bed, but more like something big had been standing there, pressing down the vegetation. The grass was crushed in a circular pattern about 6 feet across, and there were no tracks around it, which was strange because the ground was soft from recent rains. My dad knelt down and touched the grass. He said it felt damp, like whatever was there had been heavy enough to squeeze the moisture out. We didn't see any footprints or scat, nothing to identify it. That's when it hit me. The clearing we'd found the day before with all that old clothing. It felt connected, like part of the same eerie puzzle. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a bear? But bears don't make sounds like that, and they usually leave signs. A mountain lion? No, their calls are higher pitched, more like screams. This was something else, something I'd only heard about in whispered stories online. We packed up camp quickly after that, not saying much, and hiked out faster than we'd planned. The whole way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us. Even now, years later, I can still hear those vocalizations in my dreams. That day in Grizzly Creek Canyon left a mark on me. It wasn't just the fear, but the feeling that we'd stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see, the way the dogs reacted, the smell, the sounds, and that flattened grass. It all adds up to something I can't explain. I've told a few friends about it, but most just shrug it off as a bear or my imagination. But I know what I experienced, and it's why I never go backpacking without a heavy dose of anxiety. Whatever was out there that night, it felt ancient and angry, and I have no doubt it was real.